Good morning, and welcome to Master Dana Swarbrick's doctoral disputation on this, the 1st of December 2023. On the 13th of March 2023, Master Dana Swarbrick submitted a thesis entitled Being in Concert, Audience Emotion, Motion and Social Connectedness for the degree of Philosophiae Doctor of this university. On the recommendation of the Department of Musicology, the Faculty of Humanities appointed the following evaluation committee. Dr. Michelle Phillips of the Royal Northern College of Music, Professor Peter Keller of Aarhus University, and Professor Emeritus Evan Rood of the University of Oslo. Professor Emeritus Evan Rood, University of Oslo, served as the coordinator for the committee. On the 22nd of June 2023, the evaluation committee reported that it had found the thesis worthy of being defended at a disputation for the degree of Philosophiae Doctor. The candidate will now give the prescribed trial lecture on the following topic. How can engaging with music contribute to emotional regulation, and how may this be related to health and well-being? I now call upon the doctoral candidate, Dana Swarbrick, to come forward and give her lecture.
Thank you so much, Peter. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much to my live in-person audience for coming this morning, and thank you so much to all of you live streaming at home, and to those of you that are watching this in the future. How can engaging with music contribute to emotion regulation, and how may this be related to health and well-being? The world is a highly emotional place. People need to navigate through situations that evoke emotional reactions all of the time. Emotions motivate behavior. As an example, let's take this young woman who moved to a new country in which people express emotions very differently than where she is from. She was tasked with preparing a very important presentation in a very short amount of time. How can she manage the emotions that come along with this daunting task? She also loves music. Little did she know that her passion holds the key to her emotional success. Today, I will break down the different components of the question by defining each of the terms and examining key literature on musical engagement and emotion regulation. I will take a salutogenic approach to health and well-being in which I primarily focus on non-diseased populations. I will also examine how this relates to health and well-being on the level of the individual, but also through the lenses of public and global health. What is music? Christopher Small coined the term musicking, the past participle of the verb to music, to encompass the various modes of musical engagement. This has expanded the study of music to include how music is made, done, and constructed in everyday life. To music is to take part in any capacity in a musical performance, and the meaning of musicking lies in the relationships that are established between the participants by the performance. Music is most often a multimodal experience that is primarily auditory, but that includes visual elements, and it's tactile if it's loud enough to feel it rumbling through your body. It also communicates and evokes emotional experiences, and it is often social in nature, even when it is solitary, because music implies the presence of other people. And finally, it offers aesthetic value in its intentions from composers and performers, and in its reception from listeners. What is musical engagement? Examples of engaging with music can be somewhat organized along the axes of active-passive and alone togetherness. The most passive activity would be exposure to background music, but this would increase towards active as more attention was paid to selecting background music for working, listening to self-selected music, to practicing and performing music. These placements likely fluctuate depending on attention and intentions, and this is especially true for forms of engagement that are mediated by technology. Music communicates and induces emotions. Music can affect emotions in all activities, including those in which it is played in the background. Therefore, music can be used by oneself or others to regulate emotions. But what are emotions? Emotions are subjective experiences of feelings that are coupled with changes in behavior and physiology. Behaviors include facial expressions, posture, and situation-specific actions such as approach and avoidance. Emotions are one type of affective experience along with stress responses, moods, and preferences. Emotions develop over time on the order of seconds to minutes, while moods are longer lasting. However, it is challenging to distinguish between emotions and moods. In fact, they likely lie along a continuum. Different researchers use the word mood to denote what other researchers call emotions, or sometimes the same researchers have used the terms interchangeably. For this reason, I will be including research broadly on the use of music for affect, mood, and emotion regulation. What are emotions? From an evolutionary perspective, it is believed that emotions are biologically evolved to motivate organisms to engage in behaviors that promote survival or sexual reproduction. Emotions evolved in the environment in which humans evolved. Therefore, they are not always well suited for life in the 21st century. Depending on the context, emotions may be helpful or harmful. But then what is emotion regulation? There is no consensus on the definition of emotion regulation, but a common theme among them is that it involves an attempt to influence emotions. It could be to control them, adjust the type, intensity, duration, and expressions of these collections of fleeting subjective experiences, behaviors, and physiological changes. From a colloquial sense, we might think that this is specifically referring to reducing or downregulating negative emotions. Research has historically taken that focus as well. However, more recently, strategies for increasing or upregulating positive emotions have also been explored. To help that woman with the presentation, we can just tell her, "Don't worry, be happy," right? But there are also reasons we might want to upregulate negative emotions or downregulate positive emotions, especially when these emotions help in the achievement of goals. To try as hard as she can for the presentation, she might want to lower her excitement to hang out with her friends and increase her worry to be able to work harder. Emotion regulation can be conscious and active or non-conscious and implicit. For example, we may choose music that we know will evoke certain emotions, or we may be exposed to music that changes our emotions. Emotion regulation can be intrinsic, relating to one's own emotions, or extrinsic, relating to another's emotions. For example, you could sing along to your favorite song to make yourself feel happy, or you could play calming music to help relax a child. But what strategies can help emotion regulation? Research has highlighted that there are many general strategies for emotion regulation. Some common strategies, which are putatively labeled as healthy and adaptive, are acceptance, reappraisal, and problem solving, while other strategies are putatively labeled as maladaptive and unhealthy, like avoidance, suppression, and rumination. These have received these labels because the maladaptive strategies are commonly linked with psychopathologies such as anxiety and depression. The use of music for emotion regulation and its effects on health and well-being dates back to the ancient Greeks. The Greek god Apollo was both the god of healing and the master of music with his lyre. In 400 BC, Hippocrates, often called the father of medicine, encouraged the use of music for his patients to calm them. And Aristotle is also famous for saying emotions of any kind are produced by melody and rhythm. Therefore, by music, a man becomes accustomed to feeling the right emotions. What is health? The definition of health offered by the World Health Organization is health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. This WHO definition also implies a salutogenic approach to health and well-being. The salutogenic orientation to health promotion comes in contrast to disease prevention and goes beyond the pathogenic orientation to look for exceptional cases of good health. It rejects the dichotomy of healthy and diseased and instead embraces a continuum between these two labels. And this approach focuses on the assets that every individual has rather than the dichotomy between health and disease. And note the assets for gratitude, learned optimism, learned hopefulness, emotional intelligence, connectedness, empathy, empowerment, humor, coping, and attachment. These are all related to emotions. Therefore, emotion and its regulation are fundamental components of the salutogenic approach to health. There is a strong body of evidence of the effects of music on emotions and its use in emotion regulation. People generally prefer music that expresses an emotion that is congruent to the emotion of the situation in which they find themselves. Still, emotions that are expressed by music are not always the same emotions that are felt by the listener. Balthazar and Saricalio reviewed 34 publications that were specifically about this usage of music for affect self-regulation, that is, attempts to regulate one's own emotions with music. They used a framework that conceptualizes affect regulation through the use of music at different levels of goals, strategies, tactics, and mechanisms. Goals are the desired future states, and they often include adjusting affect from negative to positive, or maintaining and strengthening an emotional state. They compiled a list of 27 unique strategies through each publication, only discussed between 4 and 6. These strategies can be grouped into methods for increasing arousal, revving up, increasing motivation, increasing flow and endurance, seeking strong sensations, focusing on energetic aspects of music and decreasing arousal, modulating arousal, relaxing. Other strategies related to increasing valence, reviving, increasing positive affect, fun-seeking, maintaining a happy mood. Others still related to decreasing negative valence, discharging, finding solace, reducing negative activation, seeking diversion. Others related to memories, reminiscing about pleasant thoughts and images, inducing visual and auditory imagery, retrieving memories. Others related to cognitive work, introspecting, reflecting, thinking rationally, mental concentrating, ruminating. And finally, there were strategies focused on coping, actively coping, problem-oriented coping, emotion-oriented coping, and avoidance disengagement coping. The tactics refer to the specific musical activity that was used to implement the strategy to achieve the goals. Most of the literature has focused on the tactic of music listening rather than other forms of musical engagement, possibly because most people engage in this behavior daily. However, there are several strategies that describe other types of musical engagement and how they contribute to affect regulation. Adolescents reported that in addition to listening to music for emotion regulation, they also use more active forms of engagement, including playing, singing, songwriting, and performing to modify their emotions. Other adults listed further forms of musical engagement, including dancing and singing along. Choir singing also appears to be an effective tactic for improving emotion regulation even in people with mental health disorders. How effective is music as a tactic in comparison to other kinds of activities? When people were asked to report the best tactic for helping them regulate their mood, listening to music was second only after talking with their friends and better than exercising, reading a book, or watching TV. During the COVID-19 crisis, listening to music for mood regulation was associated with positive changes in affect and fulfilled missing social needs caused by the restrictions, because music can act as a social surrogate. Therefore, though simple music listening may not be as effective as talking with friends, there may be a number of reasons why music listening is a good second choice. If a person does not have access to social support, or because music listening can coincide with other activities. Furthermore, more active forms of musical engagement, such as performing in ensembles, often involve real social interactions. By what mechanisms does music induce emotions? Several theories have been proposed to describe how music affects emotions. However, the theory that is most widely cited is the Breck-Fema framework. This framework describes 7 specific mechanisms by which music can affect emotions. These different mechanisms may arouse different emotions. Brainstem reflexes are evoked by acoustic characteristics that signal an urgent event, and it can lead to arousal and surprise. Rhythmic entrainment is the process by which rhythmic features of the music can modify physiological rhythms like breathing and heart rate, giving rise to modulated arousal and potentially feelings of communion. Evaluative conditioning occurs when an emotional event becomes paired with a piece of music through repetition, and then the emotion can be evoked by the music alone. Contagion occurs when the emotion expressed by the music is internally mimicked by the listener, and so the same emotion that is expressed is induced. Visual imagery is the evocation of mental images that may lead to pleasure and relaxation. Episodic memory is the mechanism when a piece of music is associated with a specific emotional memory, and this can produce intense emotional responses and nostalgic feelings. Musical expectancy can give rise to anxiety, surprise, and thrills when a feature in the music violates, delays, or confirms expectations. Aesthetic judgment can give rise to aesthetic emotions like awe, admiration, and wonder if the experience is aesthetic and leads to preferences. Are these the same mechanisms that work in everyday life, though? In a series of 3 studies, Westphal and colleagues make a compelling case that music regulates emotions in everyday life and that these, in turn, impact health. In the first study, participants reported their emotions in everyday life using the experience sampling method, in which participants are randomly notified to report on episodes of their activities throughout their day. In the second study, participants were asked to recall all episodes from the day before. In both studies, participants reported on the emotions that they were experiencing, including stress, if they were listening to music, whether the music affected their emotions, and the mechanisms that they suspect were at play. In the second study, the participants also reported on whether they engaged in an emotion regulation strategy in each episode. Music was present in about 1/3 of all episodes, and during 2/3 of those musical episodes, music had an effect on their emotions. Positive emotions and higher arousal were both more frequent and more intense during musical episodes. All Breck-Fema mechanisms were reported in at least some of the episodes. The most common mechanisms for musical emotions were contagion, brainstem reflex, and episodic memory. The mechanisms that were related to the lowest stress were mental imagery, contagion, and musical expectancy. In study 2, the most mentioned emotion regulatory strategies in musical episodes were reappraisal, music emotion regulation, and social regulation. And lower intensity and frequency of stress in episodes was related to more musical episodes, and musical episodes where the participants liked the music or had chosen the music. How does musical emotion regulation in everyday life relate to health and well-being? Music causes physiological changes to our bodies. Music modulates the levels of neurotransmitters, hormones, and immune response chemicals. Specifically, listening to music affects the dopaminergic reward system, and music listening and singing modulate markers of stress, like cortisol, and promote healthy immune responses by reducing levels of interleukin-6 and increasing levels of immunoglobulin A. However, an understanding of music's effects on emotion regulation from this exclusively biological model is too simplistic to account for the wide-ranging effects of music on health. A more holistic and complex view on music and emotion regulation for health was developed by Westphal, Uslin, and Harty. In this expanded model, it is the interplay between the music, context, and listener that, through the mechanisms proposed by the Breck-Vemma framework, give rise to the experience of emotions and their associated physiological responses. Together, the emotions and physiological responses are implicated in health and well-being at the levels of subjective well-being, physical health, and mental and social health. In study 2, participants also reported on their general health and subdimensions of mental, physical, and social health. There was no relation between the number of musical episodes and physical and mental health. However, when participants reported more episodes with music, this was related to better social and general health. To examine the usage of music as an emotion regulation strategy, they compared how frequently strategies were used and how this was related to health outcomes. The more that a person used music as the emotion regulation strategy, the lower the frequency of stress and the higher the reports of well-being. Music as an emotion regulation strategy even outperformed social regulation and reappraisal strategies. The first 2 studies were observational studies to make causal inferences about the effects of music on health and to understand the mechanisms underlying its effects. It is important to conduct experimental studies with random assignment to experimental and control conditions. In Westphal and colleagues' 3rd study, they randomly assigned participants to either a musical condition or a non-musical condition, and participants were instructed to relax for 30 minutes every day when they got home from work. Participants in the musical condition listened to playlists of preferred music, while participants in the control group engaged in other relaxing activities such as knitting, reading a paper, or meditating. Saliva samples were used to measure cortisol before and after the relaxation periods at the end of the weeks, and they showed that music listening promoted greater reductions in cortisol than non-musical relaxation. Now, mechanisms of musical emotion regulation differ between forms of musical engagement. So these different forms or activities are likely performed with different goals, necessitating different strategies that would operate with different mechanisms. For example, in cases where people are exercising, their goal is usually to increase arousal and motivation, so they could choose music that would evoke brainstem reflexes with low-level audio features like more bass, rhythmic entrainment with high tempi, and visual imagery with motivating lyrical content. In cases where people choose to listen to sad music, their goal may still be to elevate their emotions. In this case, the mechanisms supporting emotion regulation relate to feelings of connection with the music, memories, the message, and the aesthetic value. People may empathize with, feel empathized by, or feel moved by the music. But is there a dark side to musical engagement? Is it always healthy, or are there any cases in which it would be unhealthy? Well, just like with general emotion regulation, music can be used as a tactic along with maladaptive, unhealthy strategies. The healthy-unhealthy music scale was developed to assess musical engagement as an indicator of proneness for depression in youth. Indeed, this scale has proven effective as an implicit screening tool for identifying at-risk youth. For the best results, people should aim to implement healthy strategies for fostering social connection, enhancing mood, and relaxing through distraction with music. People should try to avoid prolonged rumination, letting music worsen their moods, and hiding in their music. So far, we have examined music on the level of individuals, which is what is implied by this WHO definition of health. However, the field of public health situates the health of families and communities as the primary unit of health. Public health is the science of protecting and improving the health of people and their communities. The Nordic region has many experts in the domain of the use of music in public health. In the Nord-Trøndelag Health Study, researchers reported that based on data collected from over 40,000 people, women who engaged in playing an instrument, singing, or participating in theater were at reduced risk for reporting worse health, and men who engaged in these activities had lower all-cause mortality. A Swedish twin registry study showed that a high level of musical engagement throughout life, especially ensemble playing or singing, was associated with better abilities to handle emotions. The benefits of music on health and emotions may arise due to the way that musical engagement often involves training social, emotional competence. Musical engagement may equip people with skills to navigate the emotional and social world. Community music is a practice of active intervention between a leader and participants that results in enjoyable shared music making. In a review of 45 studies from the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health, community musical engagement promoted positive emotions like happiness in 17 studies, relaxation in 5 studies, improved participants' abilities to cope with stress and negative emotions in 10 studies, and provided opportunities to release in 4, and express emotions in 7. Many of these studies also reported benefits to physical, cognitive, social, and psychological well-being. These benefits occur throughout the lifespan in youth and older adults. Therefore, community music activities support emotion regulation practices and lead to increased well-being. Did you know 5% of the adult population in Norway are singing in choirs? That's from a study done in 2009 by Bosnes. And this form of musical engagement promotes health through a variety of mechanisms, including experiences of mastery, social contacts, and associated feelings of fellowship and meaning and coherence in life. Of importance for the contribution of musical engagement to emotion regulation is that choral singing provides positive experiences and emotional peaks, with participants describing feelings of elation, elevation, transcendence, and generally positive, connecting experiences thanks to their highly social nature. Community music therapy is a socio-musical movement within music therapy in which practices are participatory, resource-oriented, ecological, performative, activist, reflective, and ethics-driven. Community music therapy broadens the view from being exclusively focused on the patient to encompassing the larger cultural, institutional, and social contexts in which the patient and therapist are situated. For example, a community music therapy approach was taken in a children's home in South Africa, where adolescents participated in a choir and experienced many positive changes in emotion and emotion regulation abilities. The youth looked forward to the choir throughout each week, suggesting that they desired the emotion regulation that arose at these weekly events. And I'd like to take the time to read some quotes for you. So Lexi, who's 13 years old, said, "When you sing, then sad feelings just go away and a good feeling comes over me. Sometimes when I got worked up, I just think about the music and it calms me down." Michelle, who's 14, said, "I could really sing how I was feeling. It felt wonderful to just sing my feelings." Another youth said, "I told myself I don't have to feel this way, so it was like I embraced a positive feeling to come over me." And my favorite quote from Lee, "I laughed a lot. I was the happiest that I have been in many, many years." But is there a dark side to musical engagement on public health? I think yes. Travis Scott and his music have often incited violence. This aggressive emotional contagion became deadly at Astroworld in 2021 when crowd-crushing behavior resulted in 10 people dying from compression asphyxiation and over 300 being injured at the event as a crowd of 50,000 surged the stage. Therefore, music's power on emotions can also motivate harmful, aggressive behaviors. What is global health? Thanks to developments in technology, we feel more and more like global citizens, advocating for the health and well-being of our fellow Earth dwellers who are being subject to wars, genocides, and climate disasters. Therefore, today, I want us to also consider a global health definition which situates health in a worldwide context. Global health is an area for study, research, and practice that places a priority on improving health and achieving equity in health for all people worldwide. But how is health achieved? According to the Ottawa Charter for Health Promotion, that's my hometown, by the way, the fundamental conditions and resources for health are peace, shelter, education, food, income, a stable ecosystem, sustainable resources, social justice, and equity. Improvement in health requires a secure foundation in these basic prerequisites. So any means of promoting emotion regulation that facilitates peace, social justice, and equity also supports health and well-being. Feelings of connectedness and affiliation are another common affective outcome of music listening. An individual could use music as a means to understand another culture. Indeed, when participants listened to either Indian or West African music and then completed an implicit association task, they showed an implicit preference for the ethnic group whose music they had heard. Therefore, music could be a means of connecting individuals to other citizens of the world. Could there be a dark side to music engagement on global health? Advances in music streaming technology means that now everyone has higher availability to more music than ever before. This means that one could use music for emotion regulation at all times, whenever we need it, wherever we are. This increased access has likely led to increased use, and the current era of music streaming, through its great consumption of electricity, actually contributes to greater greenhouse gas emissions than any other recorded formats that have come before. Given that global health is concerned with improving health and equity globally, and that climate change disproportionately threatens the health and well-being of the poorest countries and people, activities contributing to climate change are also activities affecting global health. This reminder is not to discourage the use of music for emotion regulation, but rather to try to remind you all not to take music for granted. Even though it has never been easier to listen to it and use it to regulate our emotions, we should cherish it and appreciate every musical experience. In conclusion, musical engagement can regulate emotions through several kinds of strategies and tactics on the level of individuals and groups. This leads to positive and negative impacts on individual, public, and global health scales. Oh, no, we almost forgot that we still need to help the woman. So using what we learned today, what strategies should we suggest to the woman? Does anyone here want rumination? Show of hands, please. Rumination, going once, going twice, okay. I'm just gonna, avoidance, disengagement, coping, anyone? Oh, one person, interesting, fascinating. I wonder what that indicates about you. Can't wait to talk to you in the break. Anyone for increased motivation? Oh, wow, unanimous, well, 99.9% decision. Let's see what happens here. So the woman finds motivation from the rhythmic entrainment and the visual imagery and the lyrics of 100% fist of Sinsenfist. So I'll just translate for the non-Norwegian speakers here. Så tunge ting vi løser de så lett, 100% fist means heavy things we solve them easily, 100% fist. So enjoy this little snapshot from dear Kjell Andreas, dear colleague of mine.
Tunge ting de løser vi så lett, 100% fist, kom for fasit, vi har alltid rett. 100% fist, har ikke valgt det selv, utpekt av herrefist, perler bort på Stinsen, 100% fist, 100% fist, jeg var til legen hans.
So I feel very motivated, but I do also want to show you guys, what happens if we have a rumination situation. Anybody else curious about what that could be? All right, let's see. What happens to the woman if she ruminates? So the woman ruminates on how time is running out with Tida løper of Ung pike forsvunnet. This is Anne Danielson's band, everyone. So. Thank you, Anna, for helping me ruminate while I prepared this lecture. Oh, yeah. All right, anyone want to know what happens with avoidance, disengagement, coping? Okay, let's see what happens here. The woman decides to quit her job and record more music. Oh.
No love left, no love left, no love left for me. No love left, no love left, no love left for me. No love left, no love left, no love left for me. No love left, no love left, no love left for me. This drunk summer's apple.
All right, that's just some shameless self-promotion there. So everybody, if you're interested, you can check out my band, Dana and the Monsters. Luckily, I didn't engage in avoidance, disengagement, coping, so I didn't quit. That's why I'm here today. But I do look forward to recording more music in the future. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you guys stick around for the defense, which is happening at 12:15. Oh, and 3 pages of references. Yeah, extremely.
Many thanks, Dana. Now the committee will retire and ruminate a bit until 12:15, so there's a break of an hour and 15 minutes. So 12:15 back here. Thanks. Master Dana Swarbrick submitted a thesis entitled Being in Concert, Audience Emotion, Motion and Social Connectedness for the degree of Philosophiae Doctor at this university. On the recommendation of the Department of Musicology, the Faculty of Humanities appointed the following evaluation committee. Dr. Michelle Phillips of the Royal Northern College of Music, Professor Peter Keller of Aarhus University, Professor Emeritus Evan Ruud of the University of Oslo. Professor Emeritus Evan Ruud served as coordinator for the committee. On the 22nd of June 2023, the evaluation committee reported that it had found the thesis worthy of being defended at a disputation for the degree of Philosophiae Doctor. Earlier today, the candidate gave the prescribed trial lecture on the following topic. How can engaging with music contribute to emotional regulation, and how may this be related to health and well-being? The trial lecture has been found satisfactory by the evaluation committee. Now the candidate is to defend her thesis in public. The first opponent in the disputation will be Dr. Michelle Phillips, and the second opponent, Professor Peter Keller. Should any person present wish to speak as an opponent ex auditorio, notice should be given to me before the second ordinary opponent is called upon to speak. And may I also remind everyone to turn off their mobiles if they're, Now I call upon the doctoral candidate Dana Swarbrick to come forward and give her introduction.
Thank you, Peter. I'd like to take this moment to thank the committee for taking the time to read this book and the thesis and to give your evaluations and for traveling all the way here to do this. I'd like to also thank my supervisors, Alexander Revsomjensenius and Jona Wojskowski, for your guidance and patience. And thank you everyone here in person who came to support me today, and those that are also watching back home or online with the live stream, and anyone who takes the time to watch this in the future. Hello and welcome. So this journey begins way, way back. This was me in high school. I was obsessed with music, and I would stay every day after school to participate in vocal jazz choir, concert band, and musical theater. But I was also very interested in and good at science. So when I learned about McMaster University's music cognition program, I knew exactly what I wanted to do: combine my passions. I participated as an undergraduate researcher in Laurel Trainer's lab and the Live Lab, where I conducted my first research projects. At the same time, I was an active musician in the music scene of Hamilton, performing in folk jazz choirs and with my band, Dana and the Monsters. And during my studies, I came across a body of research that suggests that when people move in the same way at the same time, such as during music and dance, then this promotes social bonding. This led me to the question, can concerts connect us? Given that moving together fosters social bonding, and concerts are places where many people come together to listen to music, a stimulus that makes us move, could concerts be venues for social bonding? And if so, what are the features at concerts that might enhance social connectedness? I started from a conceptual framework in which I tried to understand all of the variables that can contribute to audience experiences. This list is intended as a non-exhaustive starting point with which to examine concert and individual characteristics and their influence on audiences' motion, behavior, mental state, and emotions. So I'll just point out a few to you. There's technological mediation that contributes to feelings of liveness or fluctuations in liveness, and there's performance, audio-video quality, song, piece, setlist, genre, sociocultural norms that are all concert variables. Individual characteristics can include things like personality, musical preferences, expertise, how they're seated or standing in the concert, the relationships with other audience members, their fan status, familiarity, volitional control, and also aspects of the audience experience, like are they able to move, are they under volitional control, are they still, are they in training with the music or each other, and do they purchase anything, or how devoted are they to the artist? And finally, aspects of experience like absorption, awe, enjoyment, agency, feeling moved, physical presence, and social connectedness. One recurrent theme throughout my work is the use of technological mediation for promoting various degrees of performance liveness. So this is the axes for space and time dimensions, and you can have it such that you have here together versus away and alone, or you can be in the now or in the past. So live performances happen in the here and the now. Live streamed performances happen in the now, but away or alone. Pre-recorded music happens in the past, away and alone. And group listening or pre-recorded performances happen when you're together with people, but in the past, or listening to music recorded in the past. So the contents of the book that some of you have taken home today are the introduction, music and bonding, concerts as venues for social bonding, methods, a research summary and discussion, and followed by the papers. So the COPPA is like the introductory section of the thesis. And the work is guided by research questions. What concert characteristics and individual characteristics influence the social and emotional experience of concerts? Can concert characteristics be manipulated to enhance the social and emotional experience of audiences? How does motion relate to the social and emotional experience of music? And what are the relations between the aspects of concert experiences? The epistemological frameworks or fields of study that I operate within are embodied music cognition, which aims to understand music perception and interaction by situating the body at the forefront of the experience, and the social psychology of music, which includes research on self-identity, group identity, interpersonal relationships, and music performance. Concert research is emerging as a distinct genre of study within social music psychology. In Chapter 2, I provided an overview of the empirical evidence that supports how motion, interpersonal coordination, and emotion are related in musical contexts to demonstrate that music serves social bonding functions. In Chapter 3, I build a case for what features of concerts make them likely to be places where social bonding occurs. Concert experiences are often so rich, intense, and memorable that they are named as people's peak musical experiences. What makes concerts so special? They are important sociocultural events that are venues for interpersonal coordination within musical contexts. Individuals gather and become a temporary group as an audience. Audience members share the purpose of witnessing a musical performance, and they can engage with the music, each other, and the performer to various degrees, ranging from observant to active participants, depending on the behavioral norms of the genre. Despite the accessibility of recorded music, people are willing to pay great sums of money and travel great distances to attend live concerts. Are audience members willing to go to great expense to attend concerts because they are so emotional, transformational, and connecting? I wanted to highlight some terminology to you. The term kamamuta is used to label the emotion described in English by feeling moved, touched, or in Norwegian, bli rørt eller beveget. And this emotion is characterized by a number of sensations and feelings, including teary eyes, chills, feeling choked up, a warm feeling in the center of the chest, and feeling welcomed or welcoming. Kamamuta is a key emotion for social bonding because it is thought to arise in response to a sudden intensification of closeness, and its evocation leads to greater devotion in relationships. And we generally use this term because this emotion is labeled different ways across different cultures, and by using this term, it can encompass all of those aspects of this emotion. So I started in September 2019 and worked on a lab-based dancing study that was scheduled to start in April 2020. But we all know what happened then. The coronavirus crisis actually served as fruitful inspiration due to the social and emotional predicament that we all found ourselves in. These papers show the progression from when the coronavirus was actively disrupting life in papers 1 through 3, to when restrictions eased and group events could occur again, allowing for the exploration of real group listening situations. The papers are presented in chronological order and can be grouped roughly into 3 packages. 1, emotions and connectedness in live-streamed concerts. 2, motion responses to music. And 3, the Music Lab Copenhagen project. So if we return to the spatio-temporal dimensions of technological mediation and varying experiences of liveness, this work can actually be organized along these dimensions, either contrasting dimensions or focusing within. The Corona Concerts project compared live-streamed concerts to pre-recorded performance videos. The live-streamed experiments projects focused in on what aspects of live-streamed experiments can lead to variations in connectedness. The Music Lab app was developed as a tool for recording movement during live-streamed concerts. The Music Lab Copenhagen project compared between live performances and live-streamed concerts. And the Standstill project focused in on group listening situations. And I'm going to walk you through each of these projects in more detail now. So in the Corona Concerts project, we aim to examine how the characteristics of virtual concerts and the characteristics of the participants influence their experiences of social connection and kamamuta. This was done as a collaboration with the Kamamuta Lab here at the University of Oslo with Beata Sitt, as well as Noemi Grinspan, based at Universidad de Ciencias y Educación in Chile. We also worked with industry and artist partners to help promote the study because we asked anyone who had watched a live-streamed concert to answer a survey, and we had 307 people respond to this survey. The results suggest that people's personality trait of empathic concern is related to their experiences of social connectedness and feeling moved, that live-streamed concerts produced more connectedness than pre-recorded concerts, but there was no differences in the emotion of feeling moved, and that greater salience of the coronavirus and impact of this led to more feelings of connectedness, and those completely mediated the effects on feeling moved. The live stream experiments project was conducted with Kelsey Onderdick at IPEM, or Institute for Psychoacoustics and Electronic Music at Ghent University. We aimed to understand the influence of feelings of agency and presence on connectedness in live-streamed concerts. We took an experimental approach and aimed to manipulate feelings of agency by allowing participants to vote or not vote for the last song, feelings of physical presence, having groups of participants either watch the normal YouTube live stream, the YouTube 360 view, or using a virtual reality headset, and feelings of social presence by manipulating whether participants could see the other audience members in Zoom or watching the normal YouTube live stream. Voting did not lead to any changes in agency, but when people's preferred song was played, this led to more social connection. When people used a virtual reality headset, this led to more physical presence, and it also led to more social connectedness to the artist. Zoom actually led to less connectedness to the artist, but more connectedness to the audience. And across all concerts, we also found that a greater negative impact of COVID-19, measured through feelings of loneliness, led to more connectedness to the artist, again, lending support to the idea that music and musical interactions can act as social surrogates. Feelings of physical presence led to more connectedness to the artist and the audience. The more that they felt that they were at the concert, then the more connected they felt. Exploratory correlations showed that reductions in loneliness and isolation were fostered or facilitated by feelings of shared agency, physical and social presence, and feeling connected to the audience. And audio quality was an important concert characteristic for fostering connectedness to the artist. In the Music Lab app paper, we continued development on the Music Lab app, a mobile application used to measure inertial measurement unit data from participants' own smartphones. So here are examples of the raw accelerometer data. We organized an algo rave, which is live-coded electronic dance music with performers Koparji and Rennick Bell, and data was collected from participants across the world. In one case, participants were actually watching the concert together, and their motion showed really high alignment, suggesting that this app could be used to measure interpersonal coordination remotely. The standstill paradigm consists of a competition in which people try to stand as still as they can during alternating music and silence excerpts. The issue is that no one can really stand perfectly still due to postural adjustments and breathing. However, through these studies, we have learned that music has a power over our bodies, and despite their best attempts, people move more with music than silence. The aim of this iteration of the standstill experiment was to examine the influence of groove and feeling moved on micromotion. Groove-based music typically consists of some rhythmic features that are particularly good at evoking motion, such as the 4/3 polyrhythm, and the on-off beat rhythm. Here are examples of the musical stimuli. Kamamuta is the emotion labeled feeling moved in English, but this emotion is described with passive motion descriptors across languages. So as I mentioned, for example, in Danish and Norwegian, this is referred to as å bli rørt, which actually translates to stirred, and this happens consistently. So we were also wondering whether feeling moved would also cause more micromotion. And so we collected 127 participants who listened to this music and drum excerpts in groups between 3 and 15, and they responded to surveys after that measured their feelings of connectedness and whether they felt that they were successful as an individual or a group. And we analyzed quantity of motion because we had collected their motion using marker-based infrared motion capture. We found that connectedness was correlated with feelings of group success. Music evoked more micromotion than drums and silence, and emotionally moving music evoked more micromotion in the vertical dimension than the preceding silence, and high groove, high familiarity evoked more micromotion than preceding silence. I wanted to point out that that paper has updated since it was printed in the book, and it will be resubmitted to a journal soon, if you're wondering why the results are different now. Moving on to the Music Lab Copenhagen project. This was a massive undertaking led by Simon Høfting, and this particular paper on absorption, attention, and affect was one of these radically interdisciplinary project where phenomenologists Remy Martin, Nanette Nielsen, and Simon Høfting worked with psychologists Jonna Vuoskoski and I. And the Danish string quartet at this concert performed to a live audience and a live streaming audience. We were interested in musical absorption and how it relates to mind-wandering, attention, senses of transformation, and affect. We measured these experiences with surveys and audience behavior, or with motion with the Music Lab app. We quantified motion in 2 ways: quantity of motion and stilling responses to key moments in the music. We found that the live audience reported more musical absorption than the live streaming audience. Absorption was not related to mind wandering, but it was related to a sense of positive transformation and the affective experiences of connectedness, awe, and feeling moved. Absorption was facilitated when people were fans of the performers or when they had familiarity with the music. The live streaming audience experienced more absorption when they moved less, while the live streaming audience experienced more when they moved more. But this could be because the folk tunes that were played promoted more motion as well as the most absorption in the concert. In a companion paper called Collectively Classical, we were interested primarily on the social and emotional experiences and the individual and relational characteristics. And we collected those with surveys and again looked at motion and to try to understand how movement and emotion relate at concerts. The live concert audience reported more connectedness to the other audience members than the live streaming audience. But both groups reported similar levels of connectedness to the performers, which was surprising because I thought that a live audience would feel more connected to the performers, but in fact the live streaming audience felt just as connected. When examining the emotions of feeling moved and awe, we found that people reported the most feeling moved during the folk piece, and there was an opposite direction in the awe, such that they felt most awe during the schnicke. But there were, again, no differences between the groups of people, suggesting that this technological mediation was not affecting their emotional experience. The live streaming group moved more than the live group, and the audiences both moved most in the folk, then the Beethoven, then the schnicke. And awe was related with less quantity of motion, so when people felt more awe, they actually were more still. And when examining the measure of stillings, that's how much people stilled key musical moments, we found that this was related to connectedness to the audience, or so feeling social connectedness to the audience. And we also quantified the amount of motion that people's neighbors were engaged in, and then compared this to how connected the person who's sitting in the center felt about their neighbors. And we found that during the folk piece, they reported more connectedness when their neighbors moved more. And the Beethoven piece, they reported more connectedness when their neighbors moved less. Wow, that was a lot. So it's okay if you didn't catch everything, but I'll try to summarize it all now. So the question again is, can concerts connect us? And in my opinion, the results I've just presented indicate yes, when people move in musically cooperative ways. Standing still in a group promoted connectedness, and that's if the individual felt like the group was successful. So it was the feeling of achieving a shared goal that promoted this connectedness. So both movement and stillness promote togetherness in musical contexts when people behave cooperatively. So towards a theoretical framework, I've aimed to answer the research questions I presented at the beginning. So concert characteristics of technological mediation, piece, genre, and norms, and individual characteristics of relationships and loneliness and their traits, empathic concern and absorption, affect the social and emotional experience of concerts. Virtual reality, web conferencing that allows the audience to be visible, and audio quality are important for enhancing live-streamed concerts. Moving or stilling in cooperative ways promotes bonding, and absorption and presence facilitate emotions. Thank you so much for listening. Yeah.
I'd like to thank the candidate for her introduction. There will now be a short break, just 5 minutes, and we will then proceed at 1:45 with the first opponent, Dr. Michelle Phillips. So see you in 5 minutes. Welcome back. I now call upon the doctoral candidate, Dana Swarbrick, and the first opponent, Dr. Michelle Phillips, to come forward.
Thank you very much, Dana, and it's really nice to be here and to be part of this panel and to have been involved in reading your very rich and very varied work. It's really quite impressive what you've done. You've got lots of publications out of this. You've done a lot of work using various technologies and methods, and I've really enjoyed following your work as a fellow researcher as you've been publishing things over the last few years. So it's really nice to be part of this panel. I thoroughly enjoyed reading your thesis. There were some real highlights for me and some lovely ways that you express yourself. I found it really interesting to learn about this Norwegian championship of standstill and that there is a Ritmobile. That was another interesting bit. And you have a way of expressing things which is very clear. And one of my favorite bits was for all of those who work with statistics, you express this so beautifully. You say that the P level of 0.5 is arbitrary, yet people treat it seriously, which is a lovely way of summing up that very problematic part of our field. So, I'm going to ask you some questions. To start with, it would just be nice, you've already told us in that lovely introduction about your background, which was really nice to hear, that brought you to this topic broadly. But it would be nice to hear just a little bit more about how you decided what your actual focus was going to be, and particularly how you decided that karma mutta as a concept was relevant to things you'd been thinking about. So how did you decide on that final title and start to think about methodologies?
Wow, big question to start off with. I think that karma mutta as a concept came to my attention thanks to coming here to work with Jonna Wojskowski, who had previous collaborations with the karma mutta lab that is based here at the University of Oslo. It's run by Thomas Schubert and Beate Siept. And quite early on, I was very privileged to seek their opinions and advice when I was trying to shape the research. And they gave me a lot of feedback, and my work has definitely become better thanks to their contributions and their feedback. And it was through discussions with them and Alan Fisk and everyone in the lab that actually kind of helped come up, or they contributed in some ways to the different variables that we looked at, especially in the first project on Corona concerts, because I had come up, the inspiration for that, if I indulge and tell the story, is I was, it was like March 15th, like 2 or 3 days into the lockdown, and I came across a Dan Mangan concert. So Dan Mangan is one of my favorite Canadian musicians, and I was watching it and feeling like warm in my chest and laughing out loud and having tears in my eyes. And then I was scrolling in the comments and I saw somebody write, wow, how amazing that we're, and this was, I wasn't watching a live stream, this was the recorded video from 2 days before. And he also, he had done the concert in where I'm from, where I was last living in Canada. And somebody had commented that they felt really connected despite being all apart. And that was like, whoa, epiphany. Like, that was the moment that I remember thinking, oh, I need to look at what's happening here. Why does this live streamed concert cause like these feelings in me? And I think that part of it was also, I was homesick or feeling a bit trapped at that point. Even though it was only a few days in, I was like, oh no, what's happening? Everybody was confused, what was going on? Sorry, that was really quick. I'll try to be more slow. And that it was these experiencing the emotion that then led to the interest in the emotion. And actually at first I had different, a different understanding than what I have today about this emotion. Right. So I actually thought that it was that this emotion would give rise to then social connectedness. Yeah. But the theory on that emotion is actually that it's sudden intensifications of closeness that give rise to feeling moved. And our data actually did show this because social connectedness mediated the effects of COVID salience on feeling moved. So through the mediation analyses I presented, we were actually able to lend support to their theory that closeness actually is what the cause of that emotion is.
And build on that theory. Mm-hmm. So through your work, you were able to enhance what we know about karma mutta as a concept.
Yes, I think so. Thank you, Michelle, for saying that. That's very kind.
Okay, so another question. I'll ask another question first and then another one linked to that. And in terms of when you embarked on the study, obviously you were thrown this very difficult situation where everything you'd planned to do in person had to be done online to some extent. You covered this a little bit, but could you just give us an impression of what that, now looking back on that, do you think that the COVID pandemic actually was beneficial to what you were aiming to do, or was it detrimental, or was it just different, having to deal with that big challenge in your research questions?
Mm-hmm. So when I applied for the PhD at RITMO, I did pitch actually a concert study was the research proposal that I had, which would have been an in-person study. And as I mentioned, I began then through my discussions with colleagues and researchers and digging into the literature, I initially decided to start out with a very controlled lab-based experiment, an experimental approach, and then to transition into the more ecologically valid concert studies. But because of COVID, then this was changed. So it felt like I lost some time, but thanks to the university, I also got an extension. So that was very, very kind and very helpful. And then, yes, in the end, COVID opened up so many technological developments and new experiences for many people today, and new avenues for revenue for artists, and new opportunities to understand what the effects of technological mediation are.
Yeah.
And I can mention that like my interest in that predates COVID and predates the PhD, because during my undergraduate thesis, I also looked at the differences between a live concert and the pre-recorded album version of the same songs, and used motion capture to find that, yes, a live concert promoted more vigor in the movements of the audience and more entrainment in the fans of the performer. And so, yes, COVID offered these opportunities, but it also offered challenges. It was mixed, and I never want to say that COVID was good, because even though I benefited, it had obviously overwhelmingly negative impacts on the world.
Yeah.
I think though that I just, in the process, understood your first question a bit better, because you were asking about the title, and I forgot that my title, yes, it begins being in concert, and yes, exactly, what does that even mean? Because you can think of it like literally what happens when you're in a concert, but also in English we use this expression, when something is in concert, then it's also coordinated together. And I use this a bit like a pun and a double entendre to communicate that, yes, being in concert also implies coordination and togetherness.
Great. Oh, and you've paved the way nicely for my next question. Great. So thinking to this term, Karma Mutta, I came across this term through the work of the lab here and through reading your work, and before that, that was new to me. And I suppose one of the things that it makes me wonder is, to what extent might language be limiting what we can learn about music and about the world? This term expresses something that can't quite be expressed so neatly in another language, arguably. So do you think that there might be scope, it's especially pertinent as we're all working in different countries and across different languages and cultures, which is a beautiful thing about our field. Do you think that it might be the case that there are concepts and ways that languages conceptualize things that we don't yet know of, because we don't speak those languages, that might end up being really useful to the study of music, that there's another term that will come along that will be really useful in looking at the impact music has on people?
Interesting question. I want to break it down to two parts, because I want to elaborate more on what you said for the audience to understand more about Karma Mutta, and just comment that there are critiques or critiquers, people who don't agree with the usage of this term Karma Mutta, that some people actually think that it's, because Karma Mutta is a Sanskrit term that directly translates to moved by love, and so linguists generally, I'm making overgeneralizations now, so bear with me, but linguists generally suggest that Sanskrit is a dead, quote-unquote, language, okay? So, but that just means that it's not being actively used and developing still. Like in English, it develops a lot because there's a lot of people using it, and so we have new words coming all the time, like the word live streaming used to have a hyphen, and now it's one word. Like, for example, in terms of the way it developed in the last few years. So the proponents of Karma Mutta theory suggest that because Sanskrit is a dead language, that then we can just take this term and use it to denote an emotion that it was never really prescribed to. And so people who do use Sanskrit, because it's still used actively in prayer and in various other circumstances that I'm not as privy to, that they suggest that that's like wrong of white Western researchers to do, to just take a term from another language and prescribe it to an emotion. And that is an extremely valid argument. But the argument for using the term is that this emotion is described in various types of language, and with various terms. So other terms in English used to denote the emotion are things like heartwarming, or feeling nostalgic, or I was so choked up. So the way in which we then communicate our emotions, it differs not only in a single culture, but also across cultures. And then, so the authors of the proponents of Karma Mutta theory suggest that you could take anything like chi or another Greek letter to denote this emotion, because it's meant, they suggest that Karma Mutta is simply meant as a label to refer to all aspects of these varied experiences. Now, to build on this, we did find, so even though the Kamamutta group has validated a survey to measure this emotion of feeling moved across, I believe it's 18 different languages, that still, and they suggest that also the surveys were not meant to be solely averaged, but you should, when there's a high value reported in response to these questions, that this then is indicative that they probably experienced the emotion. So it requires not only for the label to be used, but also for the experience of the physical sensations of chills, tears, etc., and feeling welcomed, and all of these aspects of that emotion. But when we then look into the practice of actually using the survey, in the Corona concerts, in the Music Lab Copenhagen project, in which we measured people who were both English speakers and Danish speakers, we used the Kamamutta survey for measuring their feelings of feeling moved and touched, or again, beveget og rørt på dansk. And we found that the English speakers were equally likely to report equal levels of feeling moved and feeling touched. But in Danish, actually, the term rørt has a higher significance to people than beveget. So the term stirred has more significance than feeling moved, and so they were less likely to report that they were rørt, but more likely to report that they were beveget, or less likely to report that they were touched, more likely to report that they were moved. And so this shows that there are certainly linguistic differences. In terms of if there's another term that we should be considering the impact of, yes. And actually what's funny is I feel so grateful to have actually moved to Norway, to learn a new language, and it's incredible, this experience of the more I learn, I sometimes feel there's a word in Norwegian that more accurately describes my experience than the word in English. So certainly there are other words. None are coming to the top of my head right now, but I mean, connectedness is, I think, tilknytning? No, that's connection. Or some, okay. I can't remember the word in Norwegian at the moment.
No, that's fine. That was a lovely answer. Lovely answer. Okay, can I ask you some questions getting stuck into the thesis?
Yes.
Okay, so I've got a couple of questions on live streaming. I'm really interested by that diagram that you showed us in the introduction. That's I think it's page 15 in the book, where you have live streaming in this bottom right-hand corner. Which suggests that it's happening in the now, but that it is away/alone. Mm-hmm. And then in your trial lecture, your live streaming experiences were slightly higher up, actually, so less away or alone, maybe. Mm-hmm. And I just wondered, I mean, away and alone in terms of live streaming, they're quite different, aren't they? Mm-hmm. Do you think live streaming definitely belongs down there, or might it sometimes not be away or not be alone?
Good question. So yeah, what I tried to emphasize that wasn't written on that side of the dimensions, but very good observation, is that I think that those examples of musical engagement, they actually fluctuate along these axes depending on the attention and intentions of the people that are engaging. So even if you go to a choir rehearsal, but then you're thinking about, or you're ruminating about this big presentation you have to do, then maybe you're not actually as engaged as you would be if you were fully focused. So similarly in live streams, if you've put it on and you're cooking, making lunch, for example, I know that some of the participants in the Music Lab Copenhagen project were making food while they were watching the live stream, and this might be why there was more movement in the live streaming audience, because they're moving around, doing other things, and it's on in the background. They don't really care. But luckily, we also measured things like attention to the performances in most of these projects to understand how that mediated the effects.
Yeah, it's much more fluid, probably. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great. No, that makes perfect sense. Do you think this idea of live versus live streamed experiences, in terms of them being quite different things, do you think that perhaps should a live stream intend to replicate a live experience, or is a live stream a different artifact, a different art form, and a different way of engaging in its own right that doesn't need to replicate the live experience necessarily? It's its own thing.
Super cool question. what's coming to my mind right now, and I'm not sure if this is a great answer, but is the ways in which some, especially mainstream pop artists, used live streams during the pandemic in order to engage with their audiences. And based on their behaviors, when you have the resources available because you're somebody like Erykah Badu or like, who is another, Billie Eilish, both of those artists, they had live streams that were over and above what the average singer-songwriter was doing into their camera, because Billie Eilish had some kind of virtual reality animated live stream at one point that made the news. And Erykah Badu had started a revenue stream where she had it was frequent live streams that she was doing and inviting a lot of musical guests and also creating an atmosphere, and then also had it was more of a subscription scheme so that people would pay to see multiple, I believe, I could be wrong, but so different artists were using live streams to be more than what you'd expect from a live concert, certainly. I think that there are aspects of live concerts, though, that can be brought into live streams to make them better and to enhance feelings of connectedness. And so I guess you'd have to ask, though, is the intention to connect with the audience? Because if that's not the intention, then no, you don't need to replicate the live concert. But I think that as a performer myself, that my intention is always to connect with the audience. Actually, I recently wrote a teaching statement, and I like to use my performer background to inform that, because my philosophy is essentially that, as a performer, I would never suggest that it's my audience's job to be interested in my music. So similarly, as a teacher, I don't expect a student to be interested. It's actually my job to be engaging to them in order for them to facilitate their learning. I shouldn't expect them to be interested in the topic. It's my job to make them interested. So it kind of flips the power, or at least that's how I conceptualize it.
That's really, really nice. Yeah, actually, it's later on my list, but let's go with that one now. What have you taken from your own research that has impacted your own performance with your band or other performances or has it not?
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, what's really funny and a little sad is that because of the amount of work I've been trying to do with the PhD, I've had much less time or motivation to actually make music and perform. And but part of this is that music or performing and recording, even though it's often together with people, it also can be often alone. And so I found that at the end of a day working at a computer, the last thing I wanted to do was to work more at a computer on music. And so I ended up developing a new passion for climbing, which has now then also entered into my research interests as well. So I was very fortunate to receive funding from the Norwegian Norwegian Center in Paris, I believe is the name. To go and do a project on the effects of music on climbing in Grenoble. So I did that, and it's still in the works, but that was a really fun combination. But so that's not really a direct answer for your question, but if I were to plan next year, I really want to spend more time making music. My hope is that, yes, I want to take the research and truly be a singer-songwriter scientist, use everything that I've learned in my work as well, taking the time to, especially as an international, or a person with many homes or places, that if I want to reach my audience back home, I can theoretically do that through live stream. And similarly, if I do move back to Canada, I can reach my friends and family and fans here through live streams as well. And then to not think on a simply local level like I used to, but also to think on a more global level and how to reduce travel through using live streams or everything.
Great. I'm going to ask you another two on live streaming. And it links to this second one links to what you just said, which is, did you find in any of your data or just in any of your informal conversations, even with participants, that live streaming had opened out access to people who might not have had access to seeing music in the here and now before? Maybe people with social phobias or people with physical barriers?
Really good question. And I wanted to point out that I had the privilege of watching Michelle do a talk yesterday, and she spoke about this and your work on this, and it's just so inspiring. So thank you for the work you're doing. And I think this leads well into simply a constraint of the methods that I've used, because we mostly use surveys to gather audience experience.
Yeah.
And so, for example, I don't recall even, were there comments in my Corona Concerts project where there were 300 participants' responses? I think there were, so I have to go back through the data if I want to answer that question. But that data is also up online, openly available. So I don't know that I can answer that question with the data that I have, but it's so inspiring that you and your students are actually beginning this work. And I got to meet one of your students actually at the SysMuse conference.
Oh, yeah.
It was so exciting that this student is going to begin examining how autism spectrum disorder how autistic people, they prefer, anyways.
Yeah, well remembered. Yeah, great. Yeah.
How they can, make a concert experience that they can actually enjoy, because autistic people have, and by the way, that's intentionally not people with autism, it's intentionally autistic people, because I was told by this person that they prefer the flipped language.
Yeah.
How a concert experience might be able to be more friendly for them.
Yeah, great. No, that's great. One more on live streaming. What do you think how important has technology been to the research that you've been able to do, especially around live streamed experiences and being able to capture those? Because you've used so many different methods, and this is just a great lab where you've got access to lots of different methods and lots of bits of kit. How important has that been in you being able to achieve what you've achieved with your results?
I mean, yeah, it's certainly extremely important. Without the resources from RITMO, this work would not have happened. And so much of it is also about having a team that I can work with, because, for example, I'm not a mobile app developer. Pedro Pablo Lucas Bravo is the app developer behind the Music Lab app, and it was thanks to our collaboration and his work that we were able to run the Music Lab app project. So just for an example there, it's less to do with the technology and more to do with the people.
Yes, nice.
Yeah, that's how I feel.
And it's really nice that you got the chance to do that, to work with a smartphone app, and you have some really nice bits of your thesis where you talk about the challenges around Apple versus Android and the kind of timescales and what impression are you left with in terms of the usefulness of smartphones and apps to capture this kind of data? Because that's a nice way in, isn't it? Technology that people bring with them to concerts that you don't have to bring with yourself on the Ritmobile. So do you think there is untapped potential there with smartphone apps, or is it just too fiddly, or would you use a smartphone app again?
No, I think that it is, yes. Both cases are true. That it's extremely fiddly, you have to spend a lot of time preparing audiences, but with the right number of hands, and I mean many, many hands, many volunteers, many helpers, then it's possible to implement it in a concert setting or at home. So we've gone through many iterations of using the Music Lab app with audiences, and each time it feels like it gets better. I think, so the Music Lab app began in the Music Lab app Algo Rave project. We had an alignment procedure that was shaking the phone to initiate, to notify us when the music began. So Chadi and I had talked about it, and we're like, yeah, that'll probably be fine. And then Finn Upham came along and was like, oh no, what are you guys doing? You should, we need to have a very precise, we have to expect people are not able to entrain very well, so we need 2 different tempos of beeps, and then they have to beep, and then it was so they created an ability to truly time align on the order of less than a second, whereas Chadi and I, the shaking method, it was certainly greater than a second, and so the alignment was quite poor in that study. But then also, in the Live Lab concert project, which is not something I've mentioned today, but is also something that Ritmo supported. We ran a similar to Music Lab Copenhagen live versus live stream concert project with Pop Group, And in order to prepare the live streaming audience at home, I also made instructional videos on YouTube where I instructed them how to make a home device to hang it on your chest, and like provided even more instructions, because the live people, they have lots of researchers or volunteers, if you're lucky, to help them adjust their phones to make them optimal for recording, such as dimming screen brightness to save battery life, turning off notifications, changing the battery optimization settings, etc., to prepare the devices to be used to record motion. There's still a lot that can't be done. So one huge issue that we have is that in order for motion to be recorded, the screen needs to be on. And this can be quite disruptive to performances if you had people wear the screen out, or if the screen hits the skin, maybe something gets touched and then the recording stops or fails. So it would be great if we could negotiate with Apple and Android to be able to record in the background, because it simply is not possible at this point. And that would help research so much. So they are viable options when that's the only thing you have available. In my future research, I will compare between optical infrared motion capture and the data we collect from the app, because I have the data already, I just have to analyze it.
Great, brilliant. And so linked to that, how did you, I mean, it's great you made the video for them. In some of your studies, you have loads of participants, 307 participants, but in some of your studies, the sample sizes were slightly smaller, and which is the case for all of our research. We're always looking for participants, and sometimes you get lots of willing people, and sometimes you don't. What was your experience of recruiting participants, and what were the challenges? Did people like to think they were contributing to this kind of research, or was it always quite tough?
Good question. Okay, so in the study, even in the study where we have 307 participants, the way we got that number is we recruited people using Facebook and Instagram advertising, and you can pay for advertising to these companies, and then they distribute it to people. And what's crazy and an ethical concern that all researchers should consider if they choose to advertise is the cost differences per country. So a grand majority of those 300 people were actually from Chile, because Facebook and Instagram decide that Chilean eyes are worth less than people from Norway and UK.
Oh, really?
Yes. And so that's like really sad. And then, but also like we benefited greatly from their participation, because Chile was also going through a much more challenging time during COVID than Norway, for example, and the UK and Canada, for example. And so these were also people that were greatly affected, so I was very interested in understanding then how are they using live stream concerts with their socio-emotional experiences. In terms of recruitment I'll never forget the first time I think I interacted with you was over Twitter, because it was in the summer of 2021. I was on vacation in Lofoten, but I was presenting at ICMPC, and I presented from the front of the van and answered questions in the front of the camper van that I was in. And then later, did my first multi-pitch trad climb, and at the top, I checked my phone, and I have a Twitter notification. Michelle tweeted, "Wow, wonderful presentation from Dana this morning." And that was about the Music Lab Algo Rave project, which I thought of as a huge failure. Because initially, this project, we were intending to actually ask, it was an experiment. We were doing, we had proper research questions, but then we only had 20 people who came to the concert. And that, I think it was no matter how much we promoted, people in the summer of 2021 were already sick and tired of live stream concerts. And so that was why the samples were so low, and why it ended up becoming a proof of concept. So thanks again for helping me reappraise that project as a success.
Oh, it was a lovely presentation. I remember that well.
Yeah, I remember the slides in it were research rocks. Look at what we can do. Measure people all across the world. Next slide. Research sucks. Only 20 people actually participated. But that's research. So that's why it's in the middle of the book, to hide between the two ones with higher participation numbers.
Yeah, and it's one of the things, isn't it? I mean, you use so many different methods in these papers, but you don't get new knowledge unless you think very carefully through things like methods and analysis and recruitment, and all of those things can be challenging. And that's leading me on to another question, which is, the analysis that you've done is lovely and really, nice, sophisticated. You use lots of different techniques, and it's lovely that you use Bayesian analysis. Now, I've only used this a little bit. I'm no expert in this, but I'd love to hear just what brought you to that and how you see the importance of that, because that's still quite a new method, isn't it? But it's one that allows us to take account of what we know in our predictions.
No, excellent question. And so I was actually exposed to Bayesian analysis when I was in my 4th year of my undergrad, when Dr. Daniel Goldreich, who's a professor at McMaster University, one of the best professors, he gave us a course, and it was just very eye-opening. And he was really, people that are into Bayes are really into Bayes.
Yeah.
So he preached to, and we became part of the choir, and so it was Bayesian theory, or Bayesian analysis and statistics, for those of you who don't know, is a type of statistics in which it's in contrast to frequentist statistics, which is the traditional way we use statistics. The way that works is you collect data, you make a bunch of assumptions, so things like there's a normal distribution of some phenomena that you're randomly sampling from, and then you try to understand what an effect is using various numbers. I won't go into too much detail, but then at the end of the day, you're basically given a statistic, which is like a single number, and then a p-value, and that p-value represents not the likelihood. Yeah, if you were to do the test 100 times, that 95 of those times, you'd get a you'd find the same results, essentially. But it's also, sorry, that was a very, you're trying to, accommodate to everyone's understanding. But then this p-value is set at the 5% marker. It was kind of an arbitrary decision made by a lot of people, but the thing is that every researcher freaks out and gets really excited when p is less than 0.05, because if it isn't less than 0.05, you can't publish a paper.
Yeah.
And that is a huge problem in our field and across many fields in science. And so Bayes is a bit like a response to this, where instead of having kind of these assumptions that you need to meet, that rather you basically you set your prior probabilities, or you have an understanding about the world. And even if you don't have an understanding about what an effect is, you can still set weakly informative priors, such that it's even favoring the null hypothesis. You then collect data. You use this data to then make a likelihood distribution, which will then inform, combining what you previously know with the data you've collected. What does that mean about the likelihood of an effect actually happening, so the posterior probability? And what's cool about that is that posterior probability is not just a single number, it's a distribution, and represents what's probably actually happening in the real world, which is that effects change or aren't just single numbers. And so it's taking into account likelihood. And the very best part about it is that when you then calculate a credible interval, which is the probability that your effect is in a certain range, then that actually means that there's a 95% chance that the effect is in that range. Yeah. And you can't interpret it so easily when it's in frequentist statistics. And so that's one big reason to use Bayes. But aside from the actual, purist angelic way of thinking about it, or hopeful way, that actually what happened with collecting a lot of my data is that they didn't satisfy the assumptions of parametric statistics. Yeah. And so I had to then go looking for how can I analyze this data, given that it doesn't meet the assumptions that are required for some of the tests within frequentist statistics. Mm-hmm. And that's where I turned to Bayes. And luckily, throughout the last 4 years, there's been a lot of development actually creating toolboxes in statistical languages like R for actually conducting Bayesian regression. So for example, there's a tutorial for using a package called BRMS, or Bayesian regression modeling, that is implemented in R. But actually I found that when I was trying to implement this, that still my data wasn't allowing the models to form. And I was so lucky to reach out to Max Mantee, who is the 4th author on the live stream experiments project, and he helped me actually fit the model in Stan, which is an even higher, more powerful language. And now I'm happy to say that there's an easy stats package that actually implements Stan models in R that I think works very well as well. Not to say BRMS is bad, but just it didn't work for the data that I was fitting.
Yeah.
And Max helped me make sure that that actually could be computed in STAN.
Great. That's a lovely explanation of something
Yeah.
that's quite complex.
Sorry, yeah,
We
I
were
don't
looking
think
at, me and Peter were looking at some of your code over breakfast. We enjoyed it very much. Let's just sign up. Great, thank you very much. One more question then on the kind of methods and modern developments. You have a really nice section in your thesis about open science and the importance of that. And could you just tell us a bit about what you consider open science to be and why you think it's important? Because it's still not very common, is it? It hopefully will become more common.
Yeah, so I've again been very privileged to be here at RITMO, where open science is definitely promoted and fostered and facilitated through resources. So I've learned a lot through the last couple years. So my understanding of open science is like the idea is that, and also ethically, like I'm supported, and we as researchers are supported by public funding, and that all of the work that we do should really go back to the people and should go towards helping other people. And by, so not only does it help like ethically, but also in terms of integrity, by publishing the code that is underlying the analyses. I do actually hope that somebody out there is like, yeah, let's check, did she do this right? And then finding mistakes and emailing me if they find the mistakes. Although this means, yeah, so that's being published online. And not just code per se, but also other aspects of our research endeavors. So sharing things that we've learned, sharing, yes, this project on Algorave, I saw it as a failure, and that's, I think, also good to show people like that, yes, you can have failures and it's okay, you still manage to survive in the end, or open, also, there's been a huge discussion and challenges with copyright law, and I'm very grateful that people like Alexander, and Refsumjensenius, and Ragnhild are working on this. And because basically whenever a performer belongs to a performing rights organization, then any like recording of that performance, then anytime anybody uses that, they are owed money, which is great for the performer. But in terms of then publishing music openly in research for any researcher to be used legally, this is actually a really prohibitive system. And so, and if we want to share things with people who don't have the same funding and resources as we have here, then it becomes really important that we, pay people properly, but there should be a way to do it such that you can give a lump sum and then allow like that work, if the artist agrees, that it can become distributed under CC by, for example, but at the moment that doesn't actually exist. That the moment that I've signed up for my performance rights organization or recording rights organization, then they kind of own the rights to take money and give it to me, which means I can't actually release anything then under CC BY. So it's a very strange situation. Yeah,
very restrictive. And it's nice as well that your publications, that you've gone for open access journals and that you were able to do that, because that's an ethical problem, isn't it, as well, when this research is not able to be accessed outside of someone in a university context. So, that's really nice too. Great, thank you. Could I ask you a few questions about music and what music is and how we see it and, what live music is? I was interested in the way that you use the term genre and the way you look at genres. And you do, in your studies, you use lots of different kinds of music, which is great. You showed us some of the things about the folk music, classical music, algo rave. Is it ever that simple? Is music ever one genre? Is it useful to do studies where you go, well, there's one genre over here and one genre over here, and let's look at the differences? Or is it more complex than that?
Yeah, it's extremely complex. Of course, you try to simplify it and to say something with research, but really at the end of the day, it is extremely complex. Like, what is genre? And where does one genre and another begin? I don't think that's true. There's no true barriers. There's always a blend, and people are influenced by all kinds of different things. So, and also, in the Corona Concerts project, the way I categorized genre was actually, I think it was, we gave the respondents a free text response, and then they listed the genre, and they typed in the genre, and then I had to, when they said Actually, no, maybe they selected. Yeah, I think there's some cases where I actually had to recategorize the genre, I think. Sorry, that was a couple years ago now, so I'm not remembering at the moment. But then when I was presenting that work, people, and like suggesting that there was an influence of genre, because actually one of the significant findings reported in that paper is that the dance music genre promoted more connectedness than the pop music genre. So people then were like, oh, but what about my genre? What about my genre? It's like, yeah, so, and because people all report feelings of connectedness through experiences in music. And yes, I don't think that the genre really matters. And yeah, and like also thinking back to the trial lecture, I mean, I talked about Travis Scott, who's a hip hop rap artist, and the negative influence of his music. But I hope everybody realized that then one of the positive pieces of music I played was also rap and like also hip hop. And so it's not to do with that particular genre. There's no singular genre that is promoting negative behavior or that's any better or worse than others. It has more to do with the ways in which people are using it and expressing through it.
Yeah, it's much more complex, isn't it? I think we've got a legacy perhaps in our field of research that has assumed that music always belongs in boxes, and the more we learn, the more we know that's not the case. So kind of linked to that, when you think about live music versus live streamed music, again, is live music ever one thing? Are there a set of behaviors that mean something is definitely live or is definitely live streamed, or is that more complicated?
Really good question. So, yeah, because I was thinking about, or my mind immediately jumped to like technological mediation and live streamed, and I had the great privilege once of opening for Pat Metheny with a talk, not musically. And then in his talk, he talked about, we do not play guitar. We play electricity. And I think that encompasses that, okay, almost all music, unless it's acoustic and, in person and everything, or like much of the music we produce today is technologically mediated through whether it's amplifiers. And then if you go to a festival, which is a live musical experience, but you're seated like at the end of a crowd of 10,000, you're seeing the show actually on the big screen TVs that are beside the concert experience, or beside the live performance. Yeah. And so certainly there are also aspects of technological mediation and video and live streaming that are happening actually at live concerts as well. And so, similarly, there must be differences, fluctuations based on attention and so many other factors that are influencing whether it's perceived as like live or live streamed or... And technological mediation is a lovely term. Yeah, absolutely. It always makes me think of the Royal Festival Hall in London, where they don't make it obvious, but actually every sound you hear is coming through speakers, because the hall is such that in order for it to work for theatre as well as for music, the acoustic isn't well suited for orchestras. So actually there are small speakers hidden everywhere, and what you hear is partly recorded sound, and some people find that really offensive, that you're in this great hall and you're getting technologically mediated sound from the orchestra. Yeah, really interesting. And so with that distinction between live and live streamed, and it's nice you mentioned festivals, do you think, so is anything ever completely live or completely live streamed, or do we always get it, do we always have something, whether it's a hearing aid, or whether it's, limitations with your home listening system, or whether it's the fact that when you listen to something at home, you've still got something, a child asking for some sweets behind you, or is it ever distinctive? Ooh, wow, powerful question. The thing that popped into my head, I'm not sure this is like truly answering the question, but there's also theories in neuroscience where perception is you're not perceiving anything real in the world, that rather what you've learned, your personal history, everything that's come before is also influencing your perception. And there is a lot of support for this idea because of various illusions that can happen, or cross-modal interactions that influence your perception of things. And then there's also processing time for when you observe something and then you understand it for example.
Yeah.
Like, what is live? What precision is necessary? I see why you're playing. This is so interesting. Such a good question.
Yeah, this is one to continue later on. It's that idea that everything that you ever experience, you only ever experience in the light of everything you've ever experienced before.
Yeah.
Some of which will be technologically mediated.
Or even like, yeah, like a perception, or on a question of time, like, what is real time?
Yeah.
Or what point is something happening? Yeah.
Yeah.
If you dig in with magnifying glass super, super, super close, and like we know that there are, automatic responses that come before like the higher cognitive responses.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Great. Yeah, we could talk about that, couldn't we, for the whole afternoon? Right. I'll go back to some more questions specific on the thesis. This is something that you say specifically in the thesis that I was interested in. You say, social behaviors were defined as level of engagement in social media and real interactions through reading, commenting, sharing, or discussing the concert. And for me, social behaviors it's a big term, isn't it? And given that looking at connectedness and the ways that people interact socially is such a key part of your research, how did you decide what is and isn't a social behavior? How did you decide, well, I want to look at connectedness and I want to look at this thing? It's a big, big term, isn't it, where you probably could have looked at various different things.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that particular reference, it's referring to the Corona Concerts project where we had this survey. So anybody who'd watched a live streamed concert could then answer questions. And we had, before delivering the survey, we tried to understand, okay, what are the ways in which people can actually behave socially and feel social and feel connected with others at live streamed concerts? And then I tried to think about all of the ways that could happen in these online environments. So that's specific to the online environment. And so we tried to come up with all of the options, so things like liking, commenting, talking with somebody in real life about the thing you just watched online, as these being things or behaviors that are somewhat social in nature. I feel like that list was exhaustive for the live streamed constraints, but it's possible that it wasn't, because I'm trying to think about how else you can engage with the live streamed concert behaviors.
I'm leading to another question, so shall I ask that one, because that's where this one's going.
Thanks for saving me.
No, not all. This one was leading to another one, which is that you have a nice section at the beginning of your thesis on the literature around the origins of music. So, that whole question of why we have music, and is it necessary, and is it important, and what value does it have? And I just wondered, would you say that the body of new knowledge that you've created, does it contribute to theories of the origins of music, of why we as humans have music? And if you think it does, then what do you think it contributes to those theories of music and evolution?
Great question. So there was a recent paper by Patrick Savage and colleagues that covered, it was a review paper suggesting all the ways in which music may be this co-evolved system for social bonding. And actually it was reading that paper that ended up inspiring another concert project that I didn't discuss yet, but that was conducted last September. And in his paper, Patrick and colleagues describe how they think that one of the key important features that makes music a bonding, or that might moderate the effects of music on bonding, is whether it's participatory in nature.
Yeah.
And then asking, what happens when people participate more? If they participate more, we'd expect more bonding. If they participate less, we'd expect less bonding. And a concert is a place where this can actually have varying degrees. Yeah. So I think of a classical concert, or before at least, I thought of a classical concert as being like people are rather passive, like they're actively engaged, but they're not contributing with their body motion. But actually, like we show in the concert that, well, they're very still, which is also a form of action on the body because the body naturally wants to move. So they're actually constraining themselves, and through that constraint, they're also creating a shared experience. So that said, I want to share some of the results that we've done on the preliminary results from the pop concert study.
Great.
So I worked with a singer-songwriter to have her asked the audience to participate in 2 of the songs at the concert, and we compared those 2 songs to 2 matched controls where they didn't involve participation. So she asked the audience to sing along or clap along at 2 songs in the concert, and then we measured a variety of emotions and connectedness afterwards. And indeed, we find that in songs in which the audience participated, they reported greater engagement, greater connectedness, and that also fluctuated throughout the concert. So another important question is, well, what's the difference between connectedness and bonding?
Yeah.
And so I think that through all of this work, I've come to a position, or like the theoretical position, that I think that connectedness is not in itself bonding, but rather that you could suggest maybe that fluctuations in connectedness or an increase in connectedness over time could be a way to measure bonding. And so in this pop concert study, I measured connectedness before the concert and after each song, and then again measured behaviors a week after the song. And it's not the analysis isn't done for all of the data, but that we do see a trajectory where connectedness increases throughout the concert, but it actually dips down at the third. So there's song 2, 4, 6, and 8, and it goes up to midway at song 2, up high at song 4, which was an active participation song, goes back down after song 6, and then back up and not as high as after song 4 in song 8. So it's not just that a concert necessarily leads to bonding, but there's something to do with like the individual musical experience itself as well, and like in that moment in time, it seems, that causes these fluctuations in connectedness. I also think that it's possible people interpret that question, to what extent did you feel connected to the performer, to what extent did you feel connected to the audience, differently, perhaps. What does connectedness mean to them is also a valid question. And it's definitely something that I hope to explore further by mapping how it relates to, you know, the other emotions, but also to behaviors like purchasing behavior and fanship behavior.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. That leads up onto another question, which is around this idea of, I mean, it's really nice the extent to which you have used, I can't find this question in my list, I can remember it. It's really nice the extent to which you've used a lot of existing measures in the behavioural data you've collected, but you also validated your own scale as part of your work. And it would be interesting to hear a bit about that, because in our field, there's very different reasons, aren't there, why you would use an existing questionnaire, or you would use it and you would modify it, or you would make your own. But very much if you make your own, you have to go through a very rigorous process of making sure that that is reliable and that it does what you want it to do. So can you just tell us a little bit about that? What led you to think you needed to develop your own scale? How was that process? And were you satisfied at the end that it was what you wanted to do?
Yeah, good question. Are you referring to the absorption scale?
Yes.
Okay. So actually, through the revision process, between when I submitted the thesis to you and then we had reviewers review the manuscript, we learned that actually conducting the factor analysis that we did on the data that we did it, because the data was repeated measures, that actually conducting a factor analysis in the way we did was not a valid way to actually look at the structure of that scale. And also this has been like one of the most challenging projects in the thesis, but also one of the most rewarding, because it was this radical interdisciplinary collaboration with phenomenologists, and I got to learn so much about philosophy and phenomenology in that like realm of experience and science from them.
Yeah.
And I encouraged then at the beginning of the project, look, I really think we should use an established scale, but they were very adamant that no, like there's other aspects of the absorptive experience that we think are extremely important, like transformation, mind wandering. And so because of that, they decided that they wanted to write their own questions. And so I tried to then validate them using a factor analysis. That was wrong. But then since then, other forms of, it's called dimension reductionality, or reduction, when you use a technique in statistics to try to understand, well, how do all of these different items relate to each other? Since then, I've also come across, before, I was very concerned that it's important to use multiple measures to measure the same item. However, one transition that's happened in my knowledge in the last couple years is actually single item measures can also be valid. And we see this with the way in which people's responses to a single item on to what extent did you feel connected, related really well to the actual motion data. And so like that they were related, the fact that they were related at all is so, it's like lends support to the idea that you can actually measure something about an experience through a single item.
Yeah.
And there are statistical techniques for measuring single items, like Bayesian ordinal regression, which is what I've used in the cases where I've looked at single items.
Yeah.
So actually, in the new version of the absorption paper, we're combining less items to measure the phenomenon of absorption, such that we can better understand its relations to the individual items that the phenomenologists were particularly interested in.
Yeah.
Like, not just looking at positive transformation and negative transformation as one thing, but seeing those as actually separate things, where you could have a negative experience or like a negative transformational experience that is at the same time a positively transformational experience. So like trying to understand the complexity and the nature of human experiences in a more complex way.
Yeah, and is that a scale then, so you're happy with it? Is that a scale you hope other people will now use and build that data set that exists?
So it's no longer a scale.
Right.
It is actually only questions or items. And I think that there are, it depends on which school of thought you want to go into. And that I think that in phenomenology, like to understand the phenomena of an experience and like a phenomena in and of itself, that their methodologies of phenomenological interviews give much richer data, but then that these should then inform the design of psychological measures like scales, and that there are other existing scales for measuring absorption that I think are also very useful, and then, but I think that what was interesting about this is we asked, a single item on absorption and a single item on mind wandering. And before, I understood these as being quite opposite experiences, that like attention is kind of necessary for musical absorption. But the phenomenologists disagree, and they think that actually, no, experiences of mind wandering can coincide with experiences of absorption. Yeah. And they've published a paper recently on mind surfing as the concept. I think Bruno is in the room. No, okay. Yes, so that's the concept they've published on recently to try to understand it. And so yes, I think more work needs to be done still to develop a scale that can measure mind surfing.
Yes, nice term.
Yeah.
Can I ask you one bit that's linked, that's I think it's around there in the thesis, which is just my personal interest in time perception. You say awe and absorption are conceptually similar with overlapping dimensions of warped time perception and connectedness. I'd love to know more about that. What do you think is the relationship between awe absorption, warped time perception?
Yeah, really good question. This was in specific relation to like the existing scales that exist on these emotions. And I think that one question I have also is, so in the live streaming audience, when they were more still, they experienced more absorption, and so this stillness is like important for experiencing or perhaps paying enough attention to something to be able to become absorbed. And awe also led to reductions in motion. And so I think these experiences are overlapping sometimes. And I'm trying to make the case that experiences of absorption, presence, immersion, these concepts are I see those as the most interrelated, and that they are kind of preparing or giving a mental state that allows people to then experience these emotions like awe, which I think of awe as conceptually distinct from absorption because it's something that arises in response to experiencing something grand or imagining that all of the particles in your body are actually originally from stars, like this kind of emotional experience, which it does, but maybe there's also back and forth because, of course, when you hear something like that, you're like, whoa, and then it puts you in a state that is absorptive as well.
Yes.
You're brought back as well to the moment.
I think that's really interesting because there's a lot in the time perception literature on attention, which you also mentioned, but Not so much in psychological models of time that talk about absorption, which, and yeah, as you say, they're clearly all interrelated there, so there's scope to do some really nice work there. Yeah, great.
Well, I was wondering when you talked about this, whether also how motion relates then to perceptions of time.
Yeah.
And there must be literature on it, but I'm actually not familiar with it, unfortunately. Anna would know.
Fine. That's not the topic of your thesis,
yeah.
That's fine, you don't need to be. I've got two more sets of questions. One set of questions around your knowledge being out there in the world, and then some closing questions. I'd love to know more a bit more about how your research has been received in the music industry and in people you've worked with, and your intentions with that. So you say you've shared some of the findings with artists, and which you mentioned in a couple of places. Do you have plans now to get your findings and your data out to people who are maybe venues or promoters that are considering live streaming during a live broadcast, or what are your plans for dissemination?
Yes, I would really like to get some, or like to make some videos that could then like be, or also graphic design, some information that would be more reader friendly and accessible than the book itself. So I do have some plans to disseminate it in a more reader friendly or public friendly format.
Yeah.
I've also done a few more pop science talks and outreach talks, like Science Slam and Science Snapshot. There's a documentary also on the pop concert study that's disseminated a tiny bit of like the way in which music and science are interacting. Yes, I have not done enough yet, I think, to promote the findings to the music industry or artists, but it's definitely part of the plan. And that actually reaches back into open science and what it means to be a scientist and trying to disseminate, because it's not anybody else's job to look at my work, it's my job to convince them that they should look at it, or convince them or share that knowledge.
Bit of both. Yeah. And do you, if there was kind of one thing or two things that you would hope would emerge from your research and be taken on board by one or more parts of the music industry, what would you hope that would be? What do you think you would like to see changed as a result of the things you found that we didn't know before?
That's a really good question. I guess, like, because I'm not sure, I guess, like, because of the way in which live streaming does allow you to reach a bigger audience and also caters to people, as you mentioned yesterday, like, that have accessibility issues, that yes, implementation of live streaming does offer a lot to people. Yeah. It's already something that's been going on though for a long, long time. Like my mom, she loves recorded concerts or watching concerts on TV. She said one time to me, which I'm devastated by a bit because I'm her daughter, but she said she prefers going to the live stream concert than the live concert, which I get is actually a sentiment from many people now. Yeah. But so now I've come to understand it. But so it's certainly something that would allow people to offer music and musical engagement activities to a wider audience. And so certainly I think that performers and venues should consider coming up with like a pipeline that makes it super easy for them to also live stream at the same time as they do a live concert, because it's really just helping them and helping other people. Yes. Mm-hmm. It's a really nice idea. And I think a question could be like, oh, but then will anybody actually come to the concert? Is anybody going to buy my ticket? Is anybody going to value this? And the answer is still yes, 100%. There's something still special about the live performance, which is the connection among the audience as well. And a lot of people attend these because of the connection that fosters with other people, the people that they're going with, the people that are there already, and the strangers, offering opportunities for interaction. Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think as a result of COVID, live streaming has also sometimes been seen as inferior to live performance, hasn't it? It's the thing we have to make do with before we can get back to live performance, but it has a role. It has a role in its own right in the world, yeah. Great, nice. Okay, time, okay, great. Which ones are most important? Okay, one more about your dissemination of your work. Do you have plans or do you have hopes that your work might also feed into the training of musicians? So I ask this from my particular point of view because I work at a music conservatoire, and I can see the kind of the ways that this could be done. Is that something you're thinking about? You know, how can your work help musicians who are just starting to build their career
to do their job better, more effectively, in a more connected way?
Yeah, I hosted a workshop on live streaming back during Corona for women in the Women in Nordic Music Technology group. So I was definitely like thinking about it then. And then I would definitely like to I've talked with the people in charge of academics here at the Musicology Institute for trying to set up a workshop where we could discuss, like, even if it's not to prescribe how they should behave on stage, rather to have a space where people can actually reflect not only on the music that they're practicing, but on the performance itself, and like on the practices with which that they will take with them on stage when they perform. I've also previously done a lecture for the jazz performance group at Humber College in Toronto on mastering performance anxiety and different strategies from psychology literature that have proven effective. But yeah, not related to the current work, but yes, I certainly think there's many ties to education. For example, maybe there should be a whole course on live streaming now offered to undergraduate students. Absolutely.
You should write that would be great. Can I ask one last closing one that's a quick one? Is that all right? It's a very general one, but your work is wonderfully collaborative. And I just would love to hear your thoughts on the importance, the value, the role of collaboration, particularly in this field of research, and being in this fantastic lab that is a place full of different expertise and disciplines. How important is collaboration in creating new knowledge?
Extremely important, Michelle, yes. Oh man, it's been a privilege, actually, thanks to COVID, to work with people from all over the world. It's been also, super fun to do this and have the technology that supports it. But I also really enjoy like the in-person collaborations and working together. And certainly I can't possibly have all of the knowledge needed for any of these projects. I've been so grateful for the support and knowledge and sharing that has happened from my colleagues here at RIPMO and across the world. So certainly collaboration is the only reason that I'm standing here today.
Thank you so much. Well done. Thank you for all those answers. What a great discussion. I could carry on for an hour, but I'm not allowed. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, both. There'll now be a break of 15 minutes, so we'll meet back here at 2:10. Should any person present wish to speak as an opponent ex auditorio, notice should be given to me during this break. So yeah, we'll continue shortly, 2:10. Welcome back. I now call upon the doctoral candidate, Dana Swarbrick, and the second opponent, Peter Keller, to come forward.
Hello, Peter.
Hi, Dana.
Thank you, Peter.
It's a great pleasure to be here. It was an even greater pleasure to have the opportunity to read your thesis and evaluate it, read it as carefully as I could. It's a truly impressive scholarly tour de force, I think, and I think I echo the comments that Michelle preceding me gave you. And now I, of course, have a few questions about various aspects of it. One little thing I might note, actually, this is meant to be complimentary, is that, as a person who studies ensemble performance myself and a former ensemble performer, I'm interested in concerts, but have always really been very centered on what's happening on stage in terms of the actual performers. And it's only after reading your thesis, and actually there's a lot of work that's going on at the moment related to it as well, in the lab here and elsewhere, that made me start to switch modes a little bit, and this came to bear just 2 weeks ago. I was in Berlin at a concert. It was the Academy for Alte Musik Berlin, so a kind of an early music ensemble. And what's the best seat in the house for an ensemble, for a Baroque ensemble concert? It's probably not normally considered behind the the natural horn player. Okay, if any of you sit behind a horn in the even modern concerts, it kind of skews the balance of the orchestra and so on. And there, it was interesting to see what's happening from an audience perspective, the people sitting in that position, neighboring me, and in other places. So I had a lot of time thinking about the sorts of concepts that you're discussing and how that's affected by factors like this. Another nice little thing about it was the horn player would turn around and kind of apologize to the people behind him. He was acutely aware of, of what was going on. Anyway, so that's just a little anecdote that your thesis was provocative in many ways, and in that context it really made me think about what's going on. Okay, but now let's start with some formal questioning. So I have a series of questions where most of them actually, the launch point is a particular statement that you made in the thesis. So the first one, you note at one point that exploratory research is an important precursor to confirmatory research that can help shape research direction. So that's a quote from the thesis. So I'm wondering now, are we at the confirmatory stage in studying auditory experience? How do we know when we get to that stage? And if we are, what needs to be confirmed?
Ooh, okay. Good question. So I think that it depends on the question you ask with the research. It depends on your research question, whether it's going to be exploratory or confirmatory. So for example, the trajectory with which the research I've described today has kind of taken, it's vaguely from exploratory to confirmatory, but not in a linear fashion. So but the live stream experiments work package, that's one case where it is certainly more in that trajectory, because the first project I described was exploratory in that it collected a bunch of different variables. We didn't really know what would be related. We did some confirmatory analyses and then a bunch of exploratory analyses. And then in the live stream experiments project, we actually aimed to manipulate variables. And yes, it's more confirmatory in nature, but of course there was also still exploratory analyses also in that paper, which makes this, it's not, maybe I shouldn't have phrased it so boldly in such a linear fashion, but that both things can also coincide. But I also want to mention how, though I think that concert experiments have, yes, shown light on musical interactions, but there is definitely need for more. It's, so concert research has gained a lot of popularity recently, and I don't think that's a bad thing, or like that, and there's still so much work to be done because much of it has been more exploratory, and then we get into some more interesting things, I think, when you begin to actually test hypotheses. So for example, in this project I just described on the effects of interaction and performer-audience interaction then on the experience, and manipulating those in trying to reach some kind of experimental control within a very ecologically valid setting. That is intending to be more confirmatory because of the previous relations and hypotheses. But that's, very good question.
Okay. Does this issue have bearing on the type of statistical procedures used, whether it's an exploratory study or a confirmatory study?
Yes, absolutely. So the confirmatory studies should always correct for multiple comparisons.
Okay.
And the exploratory work, when you say something is exploratory, this basically suggests that you do not need to correct for the multiple comparisons. Which I can explain further to people that don't know what stats or like about stats, but
that won't be. That's
no,
that's
okay.
probably not necessary.
Okay.
Okay. Second question. It's another kind of conceptual one, and in fact about the issue of a conceptual framework. So you mentioned at another point that your conceptual framework has transitioned into a theoretical framework of socio-emotional concept experiences. And I'm wondering whether you could say something about the difference between, in your mind, a conceptual framework versus a theoretical framework. What do you mean by that transition? What's happened?
Yes. What is my framework for conceptual and theoretical framework?
Yeah.
Oh, very good question. I guess that I'm using a very linguistic approach to it. The conceptual framework deals with the concepts that are involved, and so it's more, I think of it as being more vague, just like what is involved in this experience of socio-emotional experiences at concerts, or what are the potential contributing factors. But then a theoretical framework takes all the laundry list, and tries to put it into a more like directional way, or sorry, a directional description, let's say, of what is affecting each of the experiences. So so through investigating the concepts that were listed in the conceptual framework, then have contributed to developing a theoretical framework that kind of suggests that, you know, the audience isn't just passive observers, they're active as well, and their behaviors are both something that is affected by the concert and individual characteristics, but those behaviors can also lead to differences in the concert and individual characteristics. So things like, for example, one of the examples I give in the book as a directional change, because you can conceptualize it as going from the concert characteristics affecting the individual, but the individual also has power in their environment. So if somebody's back is hurting while they're standing, then they could sit, and that changes then an individual characteristic because of an experience that they were having. Or similarly, their movement can actually affect then the performer, and the performer can then change something about the concert experience that would then feed forward back into the motion. So it's aiming to show how the different concepts relate to each other and the directions with which they flow.
Okay. I'm wondering if your thinking on this goes perhaps even a step further. I mean, does your theoretical framework generate hypotheses that can be falsified by some empirical test? Do you think that's an important part of it, or is that going yet a step further?
Oh, yeah. I think that the theoretical framework I outlined does not necessarily give rise to very clear testable hypotheses, but that is absolutely the goal. So things like, I think one of the claims I'm making is that absorption creates a mental state, or absorption, presence, immersion. These like the things that are kind of more mental states. They create a state which can then give rise to stronger affective experiences. So that statement comes with a direction, but I think that a valid argument against this is that actually it could be also affect leading to absorption. So like when I say something that induces awe, this actually engages the audience more. And so I think that is maybe something that can actually be tested experimentally by hopefully manipulating a mental state into then changing, and then measuring the emotions, and maybe even using like a statistical test to understand the direction of the effect, hopefully.
So there you're getting into issues of causality. I actually had a question further on. When research is exploratory, it's often a situation where one maybe can't establish causality to the same degree as you can in an experimental context, where you're manipulating certain variables and controlling for others very rigorously. But there are, as you mentioned, kind of statistical ways around that and procedures. Have you been exploring those? I mean, I know you do a mediation analysis, right? So that tells you something about that, but maybe not really getting at causal relation. Can you say something about how one could go further? Have you been thinking along those lines already specifically? Do you have a plan?
Not in terms of statistical approaches, but I do definitely think that in terms of doing a controlled experiment to try to probe like the individual or like these specific variables. So like the interaction, performer-audience interaction experiment. In terms of looking at direction of behaviors, there are some techniques like Granger causality, which has been used to understand, based on time series data, does one time series Granger cause another? And so that's a mathematical technique used to determine if, another series can be better predicted by the preceding series. There's also, but this is specific to time series, so it's not really related to emotion unless you were going to actually do continuous measures, which actually has been done in some concert research. But because of the limitations with balancing audience experiences of the concert with measuring their emotions, I have veered away from continuous measures, but it's something that can be done and implemented more easily in online experiments, for example. So yes, one thing I would like to do is to do more online experiments, comparing, like being able to gather a lot of data on live stream or manipulating live stream videos for different characteristics in order to understand then how audiences' responses vary, and then you could also do a continuous time series of their emotional experience. And there is data we collected actually from the Music Lab Copenhagen project, which has not been analyzed yet, but is on my list for after this, where we have continuous ratings from each of the pieces in the Music Lab Copenhagen project from an online sample. And so then we could look at Granger causality, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not going to ask any really technical questions about statistical details and so on. One of the reasons for that is, as Michelle mentioned, we were looking over your code. I downloaded some of the code this morning, and over breakfast we were looking at it, and I was looking for tricky questions that I might be able to ask. And then what happened actually, somehow I was reaching over to my computer and ended up, and Michelle pointed out, suddenly I had trailed my sleeve in the bowl of yogurt that I had there, and I had yogurt all over my shirt, so I'm wearing a different shirt now. So you were saved by yogurt from that.
Oh, thank God. Hallelujah.
A yogurt mishap. Yeah. So instead, I'll ask, you acknowledge in the thesis, and here's a quote, a major limitation to claiming that concerts promote social connectedness is that they were not compared to other activities that are similar. So I'm wondering what sort of context, I don't think you actually mentioned what sort of context you might have in mind and what you might expect to find there.
Similar to concerts, yes. I think that, yeah, there are, well, theater productions, for example, would be a very, very similar activity, because then you have, yes, an audience-facing performer. You also have educational settings. Right now, this is basically a concert setting if there was music. And so, yes, oh, yeah, this is inspiring. Yeah, you could have, well, you could have either between subject design or within subject design and do like the exact same thing. You could actually recite a poem and then compare that to a musical rendition of the exact same thing.
Yeah. And
then ask, like, is music actually the important part about this experience, or is it, well, Peter, it looks like we're going to be working on a project in the future? Great question, or yeah, good reminder.
What are you expecting to be the key difference? You took a number of measures. Would some of them perhaps be equivalent, for example, in a sporting event? Or if you gave the example of a lecture, if it's a maths lecture, you know, maths can be aesthetically beautiful and maybe awe-inspiring in certain contexts. It really depends on the individual, I guess. But would you expect there may be situations and domains where that would look, from the perspective of the measures that you take, very similar to music, or do you think there's going to be something special about music where there'll be some difference on some measure? Or could you find another context where the responses are the same? And of course, I haven't thought this through very much, so there might be an obvious reason why it's different. But
no, I'm reflecting now and trying to think, yes, is there any reason why? And I want to say yes, because as a music researcher, we think music is special, and like people, I bet that if we'd asked people as well whether there was something special about music, that they would probably say yes, especially if they were passionate about music. But people can also be passionate about math, and maybe more so about math and music. So that's a really good question. And sporting events are another huge, sporting events are also a little bit different even than the festival, or maybe the most analogous thing to a sporting event is a big concert. Like, you can't compare a small performance to a sporting event because they draw such big crowds. So I think that, yes, these things are, I think, But music, yes, okay, sorry. My brain just started working again. But music is a stimulus, is a stimulus that inspires motion to a rhythmic, to a rhythmic stimulus. Sorry, music is a rhythmic stimulus. And because of this, it's also a stimulus that evokes a movement, and therefore provides a scaffolding for entrainment and interpersonal coordination.
Yes.
So actually, let me just rewind and say, yes, 100% music is very special, I think, because of the ways in which it affects our bodies. The thing is that music also takes place at sporting events, if we're going. So the audience is cheering, often also aligning their behaviors in similar ways with their companions. And so, yes, I guess you could ask, you'd probably design a really cool study to like just dissect this. Like, is it important the music is where the attention is? Is it important that the music is part of the experience, or is it simply okay to have this shared experience? Or yeah, what is more important, the interpersonal coordination or achieving a shared goal? So I think, yeah, there's still so much work to be done there. I'm trying to think if there's any studies actually that have already examined a comparison between activities as well. I can't recall any at the moment.
That's okay. We can come back to it too. But one of the kind of innovative and I think potentially revolutionary aspects of some of the measures you're taking is the stilling one, which is of course a big topic here. And I'm wondering whether that's something, whether you would expect that to be similar or different to the role of stilling. Does stilling happen in sporting events at certain times? Maybe when the umpire tells people to at an important point in tennis, for example. Is that a similar phenomenon? I don't know if it happens in maths or chess matches. I don't know so much about that.
I can think of like a penalty shootout
Yeah,
or like a penalty kick.
Okay.
Then that's a point where everybody's like still and attending. And then the moment that the result, the people then relax and they're either disappointed or elated. So there's probably, because I also think of it's kind of like stilling and motion, they're not opposites, like they're integral to each other. Like the only way in which you can actually have people coordinate together is if they're able to also stop at some point and then restart in musical context as well. And then also in this, with the measure of stilling or standing still, it's usually, it's still a fluctuation in motion that's causing these differences.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go even further into your thesis to the conclusions. And in the conclusions, you state that concerts are venues of social connectedness, the self-transformational experience of absorption, the self-transcendent emotions of kamamuta and awe. And you touch on, you mentioned isolation and things like this, but I'm wondering whether you think that the findings that you have and these sort of conclusions have relevance and potential other clinical applications. You mentioned isolation, as I said, during the COVID pandemic, but are there other more general cases? Could these powerful responses be harnessed in certain neurological and psychiatric or neurodevelopmental conditions? I mean, autism came up in the previous question, but I'm wondering whether one could go even further. Some of the measures that you're using, for example, in terms of diagnostic or assessment.
I wasn't thinking on the order of diagnostic and assessment, but actually I recently put together a project pitch or a study proposal that would use, live streamed concerts as an intervention for older individuals, because aging, as we know, the aging population, one thing that can actually predict or lead to dementia is when they're lonely, because then they stop interacting or stop using, as we stop using our brains and the social skills that we have, then they can also deteriorate. And so whether there's some way to make people then feel connected or somehow engage with art when they're, for example, confined to their own homes through using live streams, that would be something really interesting to see whether how connectedness affects, or like how connectedness as an outcome of a live stream concert would affect the brain, or also their emotions, and also, aging in general. But it's a really good question though, and I almost want more time to reflect and think. I'm basically thinking out loud, which is really fun, but And I wonder, because there's also, of course, disorders in which people are maybe antisocial, and it would be interesting if you expect if you expect that people behave a certain way in a concert, but then you have this person who's disruptive, then could you diagnose them from their behavior at a concert? I guess that I don't think that would be an application personally, but I think that that's an interesting question.
or to assess whether an intervention is changing something across time. I mean, in psychological interventions, systematic desensitization for anxiety, for example, exposing somebody gradually to a situation. I'm just tempted to think that some of your measures might actually have relevance beyond just the sort of typical healthy concert experience in cases. The case of amusia comes up as well, which I didn't have a question on. Just while you were thinking and improvising, I was thinking and improvising silently, covertly. Amusia. I remember reading papers about people with amusia who maybe, if you play two tones and one is higher in pitch than the other, lower, and you ask them, they can't give a reliable response. But rhythm perception, for example, is intact. So people often go to the concert. People sometimes don't know they have amusia. They're wondering what's so special about the experience that people are dragging them along to. To them, I remember a quote from a paper, I think it was in Music Perception. Actually, it's not even a quote, it's the title, like Pots and Pans Falling Down the Stairs or something like that is what the experience of one a music individual, I think, described the concert experience. If I recall correctly, I might be muddled on that, but I'm wondering whether sources of Kamamuta and awe, if you've talked to any people who don't experience music in the typical way, whether they still experience these type of heightened responses for some other reason.
Well, correct me if I'm remembering incorrectly, but I also could remember reading a paper where there were reports of people with amusia having emotion perception and music intact.
Okay, I don't know much about the topic, so if you can explain. You can
definitely think I saw a paper on this where emotion perception was still intact despite not enjoying, but it could be also it's maybe not everyone with amusia because there's also individual variability within the different types of amusia.
Do you recall how emotion perception was assessed, like which emotions
no.
how were they?
I don't recall at all. I just remember, I think it was a title I read recently, perhaps, but I could also be wrong. But I think that would be an interesting question. I don't think I actually know anyone with amusia personally, not that I'm aware of. But that would be super interesting is are there still benefits or do they still have emotional experiences despite having no pleasure derived from the music? But I think that also relates to, is pleasure related to the experience of emotion or these affective experiences? And I think that pleasure is certainly one mechanism by which you can achieve or experience an emotional outcome from the music. And actually, I have one of my hypotheses that I haven't looked at yet, but the reason I described with Michelle how in the pop study we saw the trajectory of connectedness was kind of, it wasn't continuously increasing, that it was going up and down. Mm-hmm. I think that the reason that this last song in which the performer actually did encourage audience interaction, it received a lower connectedness rating than the previous one where they had interaction. I think it's because that last song was enjoyed less by the audience. I still have to dig into the data to confirm that, to check if enjoyment mediated the relation between the interaction and connectedness. But that's my current hypothesis, so I'm definitely going to explore whether pleasure is related to these affective experiences as well. Yeah.
Actually, now that you're mentioning pleasure, this wasn't one of the scheduled questions, but in my understanding, activation of the reward system in the brain, it's not necessarily the pleasurable nature of the stimulus. That, of course, is a factor, but the anticipation of reward or pleasure is plays a big role. Do you think that plays a role? This is getting now a little bit into mechanism kind of territory in these contexts. If people have different expectations about what they're going to experience in a live or a live streamed or a in-person situation, does that expectation somehow modify experience of kamamutta and other sorts of factors that you're interested in.
So can you, okay, because I had an idea that's not directly relating to like the question,
Yeah?
and I'm not sure I'm going to remember this question perfectly.
So you're writing a paper.
So if you want to, I did not
While
manage
we-
to write it down properly,
Yeah.
but I was thinking about, I wanted to share some extra information about the Music Lab Copenhagen measure of stilling.
Yeah, go
So
ahead.
that, and it relates to this. So Finn Upham is who conducted the musicological analysis of the music to identify where they think people would still. And apparently, from their analyses on the motion and the stilling, that actually people anticipated these moments of stilling. So they stilled earlier than the moment arrived, which is super cool. In terms of understanding though, like the mechanisms, does that lead then to these emotions? It's, we're not able to ask that question with the data we have here because this stilling measure, we took a single measure of stilling for each person across an entire piece and then compared it to a single, item collected after the piece. So we just don't know in terms of we don't know very much about the way in which expectation then led to the connectedness, even though we know that this stilling response, the more the people stilled, related more to connectedness to the audience. Maybe one way, though, to ask is you could actually measure how early they stilled, and was that in some way, like the duration before the event itself, was that related to connectedness as well? That could be maybe a new analysis or another way to look at the data, I suppose. But then, see, I'm not really sure if I've answered your question. Anticipation, it was, what is the role of anticipation and expectation in these emotional outcomes of kamamutta and connectedness?
It addresses it, and that's at the very local time scale, which is actually what I was asking about. But while you were answering, I was thinking there's even the more global time scale, somebody's belief. If they believe that they are going to be attending a concert in person versus a live stream concert, which could happen for certain reasons. I'm wondering whether that could modify their experience of what they actually then come to pass, if you know what I mean. For example, they turn up at a venue and for some technical reason they have to watch a screen rather than people live on stage. Yeah.
I'm sure people would be devastated because people generally think, and we've shown that yes, there is something special about seeing the live band in person.
How about the other way around then?
Oh,
You think
that
it'd
would
be symmetrical or asymmetrical?
we didn't collect data on this, but this happened where in the paper from my undergrad, where we measured the audiences at a live concert compared to a pre-recorded album, the band came out at the very end of that pre-recorded album to play one song for the people that had showed up. So, and I know they were overjoyed to watch the live band themselves rather than just listen to the album. So I think that certainly there's a role of, yes, expectation, and but I don't know if that would be, it is expectation, but at the same time it's also more to do with the fact that they're there in person and that there's this like shared attention and shared experience as well.
Okay. Shall I go on? Okay.
I think so.
Your study focused on adults, as far as I'm aware.
Wait, sorry, what was
Adults. You had grown-ups in the study, right?
Adults, yes.
There weren't studies with children, or
I heard you
were
say
they
analysis.
inadvertently?
Your study focused on analysis. I'm sorry.
No,
Adults,
no,
yes.
no. Adults. Can you speculate about developmental time courses of things such as kamamutta? Or I know it's maybe a tricky question, but would similar effects be observed in young children, and how young? Like kids at a Wiggles concert, or I don't know what the other kids' bands are, but from Australia, the Wiggles are very famous. Are what they're experiencing similar? Could you classify it in terms of these terms, in similar terminology and conception?
I think that a group here at RITMO has done a concert experiment with children, and I'm not remembering the exact wording of the questions we asked were asked to the children in terms of their emotions, but I think that they used emojis in order to represent the emotions. I don't think there was an emoji that particularly described feeling moved, but it was, I think, heart eyes, or was it hearts on the face? It was an emoji that somewhat represented like feelings of connection or feeling moved, but it was through.
How old were the kids around about?
They were school-aged, from like, I think it was 8 years old to 14 or something. A big range. I can't remember all the details because actually I wasn't involved in the actual data collection.
Yeah.
But we can talk more after with them.
Yeah.
But in terms of though, I don't think I've come across anything on the development of that emotion of feeling moved. So that's a really interesting question. But one thing that I thought of in the question that's not about the emotional reactions, but rather about the way in which children engage with movement with or music with their bodies is, and I had this really interesting experience in Lom in Norway, where I was visiting with my mom, and we were walking around, and we saw a bunch of adults going to the schoolyard, and I asked what's happening, and they're like, oh, the kids are performing a concert. So I was like, oh, can we join? Yes. And so there at this concert, the kids were playing super groovy music. Like, it was so danceable and on brass instruments, and all of the children in the schoolyard, they were dancing and moving their bodies, and I was there like grooving, and all of the Norwegian adults were completely still.
Yeah.
And it was more so there than I've experienced here in Oslo also. Like, and I think then that made me wonder, at which point in Norwegian development do they forget, or do they choose to not move to music? Because it is cultural, and it's not a bad thing. It's just culture, and it's the way that the society has somehow agreed to interact with musical experiences, and it's really fascinating. And I wonder then also, how does that then contribute to the emotional experiences they're having with the music as well? Yeah. And how does that also relate to then the bonding, because it's part of the expectation of this culture is you do stand still to listen to this kind of music. And even though that music in other cultures evokes a lot of motion and movement. So it's super interesting question that we could do cross-cultural work on, Norway and Canada, for example. That would be really interesting.
Yeah, okay. Actually, it brings methodological issues, of course, too. Maybe if the children are very young, can't ask the same sort of questions about their subjective experiences, so objective measures are needed. I'm wondering, what do you think the prospects are for getting objective physiological measures of Kammermutter? Have you got some candidates in mind that are already promising?
Yeah, so because feeling moved comes along with some physical changes like chills, chills is an experience you can measure. The only issue is that chills also come along with other emotional experiences like awe or fear, and so measuring chills does not give you the full picture of the emotion, but there are several ways to measure it. So one device that was recently described and is open source, like you can learn online how to make it, is called the chiller, and it was presented a couple years ago at the NIME conference, and I think it was NIME, and yes, it measures something about the piloerection of the hairs on your skin. Another way is I believe that galvanic skin response or skin conductance is another measure or physiological measure that is somewhat related to chill experiences as well. And it's been used also to detect, it's like somewhat related. It's not super consistent, but does show some fluctuations.
Controlling temperature is important in these studies, I think. So in the live setting, that can be that's one of the big challenges. Yeah. But I agree, it's certainly promising.
Yeah.
Yes.
But in terms of measuring the emotion, though, I think that in order to measure an emotional experience, you can't just rely on objective measures. You also have to ask the person how they're feeling. There's just no objective measure that's going to truly, like maybe you can also measure face activity. So that's one thing that people do in terms of happiness. You can measure the zygomaticus muscle activity or activation. But that's not, like happiness is also implied, or joy is implied in many other emotions that are positive as well. So you're getting a generic positive emotion. There's also a neural measure of approach avoidance behavior. So it's alpha asymmetry. So if alpha levels are higher on one side of the hemispheres, and you can do a difference, then you can infer if it's approach or avoidant, or if the person is feeling approach or avoidant. But you can see these terms are like much more generic than an actual specific emotional experience. Yeah.
Those are good responses.
Oh, but also, okay,
I feel like I'm getting the complimentary steak knives or something now, the extra bonus. Yeah.
Wait, there's more. One other thing that I don't know if we can actually apply this in a concert, but as I mentioned, this like feeling moved emotion, it's described with these passive indicators of motion. So at least maybe the results might change when I do some more analyses, but in the current analysis, we found that vertical motion was greater for the emotionally moving song in the Standstill project, which suggests to me, I think, because vertical motion tends to be most related to breathing changes rather than postural adjustment. And so maybe you can measure breathing to maybe also check. And I would like to do a study to investigate whether breathing could be used as well as a measure for feeling moved. I'm not sure if that's been done yet already.
Thank you. Okay, one more formal question and then another one that occurred to me during the previous line of questioning about individual differences. So you mentioned this relatively briefly in the thesis, and I'm wondering if there's more to say here. And actually, I think it was the study that you've given us here in its revised form, which is on the app development. I think you mentioned there that you use the 10-item personality inventory, right? In that, and yeah. Because it wasn't a large sample, I guess, did you look at other personality dimensions apart from empathy? I guess, and did you have any predictions for what sorts of things might be also influential in terms of other aspects of differences between individuals that might be relevant? Should you recommend people to assess all aspects of empathy in this line of work, or have you already honed in on very specific dimensions?
Good question. The other individual difference we measured in the Music Lab Copenhagen project was there's actually a scale used to measure people's predisposition to absorptive experiences in music. So that's the absorption in music scale. And so that did, in fact, I thought it was such an obvious finding, I didn't want to waste time mentioning it, but it did. It was related to people's level of absorptive experiences and the musical absorption they experienced. And the research on music and empathy suggests that, so the empathic concern subscale is part of the interpersonal reactivity index, which I think was actually, I'm not fully sure, but Davis, 1980, that reference actually to his PhD thesis, I believe, because I couldn't find an actual paper reference. And then there are other dimensions there. So the other one that's considered relevant for music, based on the literature showing relations, I believe is the fantasy scale. Yes, I got the nod from Jonna. So awesome, perfect.
Coaching.
I knew it. I just confirmed that I didn't have to go digging in my memory for which other subscale it was. But yeah, so those two are the ones that show the most, like biggest correlation with musical experiences. Yes, I didn't yet analyze the TIPI data, but I collected it in the pop concert study as well, and we did not collect that though in the Music Lab Copenhagen project. But there's probably other, so personality is related also to the emotion regulation stuff I described this morning. I think it was, I can't remember which of the big five it was related to. I think extroversion was one, and neuroticism, of course, yes. So neuroticism and extroversion seem to also be related to emotional experiences in music, and so might also be interesting features to look at for how people with those personality characteristics experience concerts. Okay.
That's interesting, because those very two keep coming up in funny contexts related to music. We've been doing work on the role of conditioning processes, like learning processes in sensory motor synchronization, and there are correlations there in conditioning with neuroticism. Anyway, that's beside the point. Yeah, the very final question, it's actually a terrible kind of question. Like, it's the sort of thing that everybody hates, when the naive question that you'd get, what's happening in the brain? I know that this wasn't the focus of your study, but how much do we know about brain responses associated with phenomena such as Kamamutta and awe? Do we know something concrete already that's relevant, and is this something that can be your sorts of paradigms? It's amenable to, I know I was at the meeting yesterday where we heard from Michelle about taking neurophysiological recordings in these live settings. How promising do you think that is? Is it an urgent question, or is there other things to get to first? Is there work outside the live concert setting that would enable you to at least generate predictions about what you might see in the brain, what sort of indices one might look at?
Well, yeah, I think Michelle brought it up yesterday, and the one thing that's interesting to look at is a hyperscanning approach. So that's when you measure multiple brains at the same time to understand, well, is there alignment between the signals? And actually, so this paper was never published, and I'm not sure what's happening with it, but I think it's because, so I was involved in a project in which we did hyperscanning at a live concert in the Live Lab back in 2016 with Molly Henry, Dan Cameron, Jessica Grahn, and I think it, and then there's been studies since then in which people have measured multiple people at concerts as well, most often using EEG measures, so looking at the electrical activity of the brain. And I think in all the studies I've seen that there tends to be coordination or coherence between brains, and that's really interesting. And then there was one also that it gets even more interesting when you relate it then to their experiences and how they, whether the emotions are related to the coherence of brains. But if you think about what that measure is really measuring, it's these people are undergoing the same experience, and so it makes sense that there would be some coherence, time-aligned, between their brains, because they're perceiving the same thing. Of course, there will be individual differences in their experience, but that some of the things your brain does, like process the visual stream or the visual world and process the auditory stream of information, that those things will be similar across brains because our brains are kind of designed in the same way or similar ways, that we know that there's certain parts of the brain that are responsible for different parts of the experience. But if you were to ask, what part of the brain is involved though? Well, it's all involved. That's the cool thing about concerts, is that they are multimodal experiences. So you have the auditory system, the visual system, and tactile, again, as I mentioned earlier. And in terms of though then, which parts though then maybe lead to bonding? I mentioned the dopaminergic system earlier, so the reward system of the brain. And I think that I think that there's definitely value for using neuroscientific approaches, because then you can also, use this as maybe also diagnostic tools. As far as I know, haven't seen a neuro study on the feeling moved and touched yet, so that would be really cool. I definitely think we have the technology and the interest to do that here. And in terms of on concerts, I can't recall right now the specific differences that they found, but there is a handful of studies out there that have investigated this, but none on live streaming, I think.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's no need to apologize. That was a very comprehensive response. And in fact, I've reached the end of my list of questions. That's okay? Okay. Thank you very much, Dana.
Thank you. Oh my God.
I'd like to thank the opponent and the candidate. Would anybody wish to speak as opponent ex auditorio? That seems not to be the case. On behalf of the Faculty of Humanities, I would like to thank the candidate and the evaluation committee for having carried out this disputation in a very inspiring and very thorough and full of energy and lots of information to absorb as well. It's been really educational and not least pedagogical manner. And I now declare that these proceedings are over. A report will be made to the department, the board of the University of Oslo. The disputation ceremony is hereby concluded. Disputatio per acta est.